Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Alice Adams and Tibor Vass. Alice Adams and Tibor Vass were colleagues at the Radisson Blu Edwardian Heathrow Hotel. Living just 6 miles from the hotel, Alice had joined the team 3 weeks prior and quickly formed friendships with her co-workers, particularly Tibor. Born and raised in Budapest, Hungary, Tibor was a people person who loved music, playing almost every instrument, with the piano being his favorite. He had taught his younger sister, Isabella, to play piano, and they would often perform together for their parents. Tragedy struck in 2007 when Tibor's father passed away, leaving the family struggling to cope. Tibor, then a teenager, took on a more significant role in supporting his mother, Rosalia, and younger sister. At 15, he started working full-time to help alleviate his mother's burden. He later applied to the University of Budapest in 2008, hoping a college degree would lead to a better job and greater financial stability for his family. Despite his exceptional talent, Tibor was unfortunately denied admission to the university. Tibor discussed his plans to move to Great Britain with his mother, who seemed to support the idea. In July 2010, at the age of 19, Tibor relocated to the United Kingdom and settled in London. He began working at the Radisson Blu Edwardian Heathrow Hotel, where he enjoyed his job, responsibilities, and interactions with colleagues and new clients. Tibor quickly formed a bond with Alice, a talented musician, as they often found common topics to discuss. Both Tibor and Alice worked as receptionists at the hotel, along with Attila Ban, a 31-year-old who had been employed there the longest. Attila was recognized as the hotel's best employee in 2010. As Tibor and Attila were both from Hungary, they developed a close relationship. The hotel provided accommodation for its new employees, and Attila and Tibor lived in a company apartment behind the hotel. This arrangement was convenient, as it saved them money and reduced their commute time. Tibor was thrilled to be in England, but he didn't abandon his plans for higher education. He reapplied to the university in Budapest and was accepted this time around. Overjoyed, he had to return to Hungary in August 2011. To bid him farewell, a small party was organized on August 9, 2011, attended by Tibor, Attila, Alice, and other hotel employees. The next day, the trio was scheduled to work, but none of them showed up. Their colleagues raised the alarm when they failed to report for work at 7 a.m., and the police were notified at 7:53 a.m. Upon arriving at the house, the police found the door unlocked and the interior quiet. When an officer opened the door, he was met with a disturbing scene. Alice lay on the living room floor, her face covered by a pillow, with 22 stab wounds on her body, as later confirmed by the medical examiners. In the bedroom, Tibor's naked body was found on the bed, having died from 2 stab wounds to the heart. Attila, however, was nowhere to be found. The police surrounded the house to secure the area, and investigators and forensic experts started their investigation. As they examined the crime scene, they discovered that the bed where Tibor's body was found was not where he was actually killed. The bed was too tidy, indicating that Tibor had met his fate elsewhere. It appeared that the perpetrator had initially wounded him, removed his clothes, cleaned his body, and then placed him on the bed. Upon further inspection, the apartment was found to contain empty alcohol bottles and illicit substances, suggesting that they had been used during a party. Police officers thoroughly searched the house, the surrounding area, and the attic for Attila Ban, but he was nowhere to be found. His personal belongings, including his papers, were still in the apartment. As a result, Attila became the prime suspect in the investigation. While forensic experts continued to analyze the crime scene, investigators began questioning Attila's co-workers at the hotel. The staff reported that Attila had taken a particular interest in Tibor, a new employee from the same country, immediately showing him around and helping him settle in. Attila even went so far as to adjust his work schedule to match Tibor's. Tibor was a young and attractive man who attracted a lot of female attention. However, investigators discovered that Attila had romantic feelings for Tibor, which he openly expressed. According to the hotel staff, Tibor had rejected Attila's advances, making Attila unhappy. Things took a turn for the worse when Alice joined the hotel staff 3 weeks before her death, and Tibor started paying attention to her. Attila became jealous, despite knowing that Tibor was only interested in women. The investigation raised an important question: could Attila have committed the murder out of jealousy and unrequited love? A disturbing Facebook post from Attila, made before the police discovered the bodies, suggested that he was indeed involved. At 6:23 a.m., Attila had posted, "I would like to wake up from that nightmare." Friends commented on the post, expressing their concern, but Attila never responded. This message further solidified the investigators' suspicions that Attila Ban was responsible for the deaths of his colleagues. The number of stab wounds provided a clear indication of what had transpired. Alice sustained 22 stab wounds, while Tibor was stabbed only twice. Furthermore, the positioning of the victims was telling. Alice was found on the floor with a pillow over her face, while Tibor was discovered on the bed. When investigators spoke with the other people who had been at the apartment earlier that night, they learned that Attila, Tibor, and Alice had been the only ones left behind. This suggested that the tragic events had unfolded after the others had left, in the hours leading up to dawn. The news of Alice's death sent shockwaves through the families of both the victim and the perpetrator. The Adams family, Alice's family, released a statement in which her mother, Sarah, paid a heartfelt tribute to her daughter. She expressed her overwhelming grief, saying, "My heart is shattered into a million pieces. I will carry this sadness with me for the rest of my life. I deeply miss my beloved Alice and would do anything to have one more chance to hug her tightly and see her bright smile. The loss of my child has awakened intense emotions within our family, sorrow, anger, and a sense of devastation that we can hardly bear. As a mother, I feel that I failed to protect my child, and that realization is something I must confront every day. Not knowing exactly what happened to Alice on the night of her murder is a constant torment. I would rather face the harsh truth than be left to imagine the sequence of events that led to her death. Alice was an extraordinary and unique individual who brought so much love, joy, passion, and kindness into the lives of everyone she touched. Her loss is a tragedy that cannot be put into words." Meanwhile, police were searching for Attila Ban, but he seemed to have disappeared without a trace. When they attempted to track his phone, they found that it was transmitting signals from the same area as the hotel, which was unusual. It was later revealed that Attila was actually much closer than anyone had suspected. After spending 2 days examining the crime scene, the investigative team left the house, only to have the forensic team return later to conduct additional tests. Upon re-entering the house, they found that the door they had left unlocked was now locked from the inside. Inside the room, they discovered Attila Ban lying on the bed, intoxicated and wounded after attempting to harm himself with scissors and a knife. The investigators questioned Attila, but he responded bizarrely, using gestures to convey his thoughts. He was then taken to the hospital for medical attention. Unbeknownst to the investigators, Attila had created a hiding space within the sofa bed where Tibor Vasa's body was found. To create this makeshift hiding spot, he had made a slit in the bed's base, grabbed a phone, several bottles of water, and climbed inside. Throughout the investigation, Attila had been secretly watching and listening to the police through the holes he had made. Attila Ban was arrested at the hospital as the main suspect in the crime. His trial began on July 9, 2012, and during the proceedings, details of the heinous crime were revealed. The party had escalated out of control after Tibor, Alice, and Attila were left alone in the apartment. Prosecutors confirmed that there was a consensual physical encounter between the three, with DNA evidence found on Miss Adams' body. The evening took a devastating turn. Attila claimed to have no memory of the events that followed, only recalling waking up the next morning to find Alice and Tibor lifeless. Overcome with guilt and remorse, he considered taking his own life but was too afraid to do so alone. The court learned that Attila had been consumed by jealousy towards Tibor, particularly after a team-building event where he had thrown a tantrum because Tibor was in a photograph and he was not. The situation worsened when Attila discovered that Tibor had been accepted into a university program in Hungary and would be leaving the UK soon. The final trigger was likely witnessing Tibor and Alice kissing, which sent Attila into a fit of rage, ultimately leading him to take the lives of his two friends. Prosecutor Richard Whittam revealed in court that Attila Ban was discovered naked on a single bed, with injuries to his wrists, forearm, and neck. It was later found that he had been hiding in the base of a double bed. Remarkably, he had managed to conceal himself and remain undetected throughout the entire investigation, including the pathologist's examination, the removal of the bodies, and the crime scene examiner's investigation. When questioned about the oversight, Detective Inspector John Finch defended the police, stating that it would be impractical and potentially damaging to lift up every bed in search of people. He explained that this could result in the loss of crucial forensic evidence and was not a standard procedure in such cases. Rosalia, the mother of Tibor Vass, paid a heartfelt tribute to her son, remembering him as a friendly, outgoing, and talented young man. She recalled his childhood interests in music, arts, and sports, as well as his passion for photography, which led him to invest in a professional camera with his first paycheck. According to Rosalia, Tibor had many friends in both Hungary and the UK who appreciated his kind and supportive nature. She said that, on August 11th, I received devastating news. My 20-year-old son, Tibor, and his friend Alice, had been murdered. The killer was a shocking revelation, Tibor's own friend, who I had trusted to look out for my son. This friend had personally promised to keep Tibor safe, which made the news even more difficult to accept. Days before the murder, I had taken comfort in knowing that Tibor had found a mature and intelligent friend in London. Now, I was consumed by grief and struggled to comprehend the tragedy. The subsequent police investigation and trial only added to my suffering, forcing me to relive the horrors of that fateful night. The pain and loss my family experiences will stay with us for the rest of our lives. The perpetrator, Attila Ban, pleaded guilty but claimed he couldn't recall the details of the crime. On July 18, 2012, the jury delivered a guilty verdict after just 5 hours of deliberation. A month later, on August 17, Attila Ban was sentenced to 2 life terms. He will have to serve 26 years before being eligible for parole. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Zoe Hastings. Zoe Hastings was born on November 21, 1996, in Kansas, as the oldest of 5 children. She was a responsible sibling, often putting her parents' needs before her own. Her family was deeply rooted in their faith, spending a significant amount of time at church. When Zoe was in high school, her family moved to Dallas, where she attended a school that fostered her creativity and passion for the arts. She excelled in drawing and enjoyed participating in school plays. Outside of school, Zoe worked at an art studio and as a lifeguard during her summer breaks. After graduating, Zoe had the opportunity to attend top universities, but she decided to delay her education to focus on her church. In October 2015, at the age of 18, Zoe was preparing for a mission trip with her church. She planned to attend the Sunday service to discuss the trip's details. Zoe left her house around 4:40 p.m. in the family minivan, promising her parents she would return for dinner. However, she failed to come back, which was unusual for her. Zoe's parents tried to reach her after the service, but she didn't respond to their messages or calls. They then contacted her friends, thinking she might have visited someone, but no one had seen her. As the evening wore on, her parents grew increasingly worried and decided to call the church to see if Zoe had shown up there. However, they were surprised to learn that Zoe had never arrived at the church. This was highly unusual behavior for Zoe, as she had always kept her parents informed of her current whereabouts and had never disappeared without explanation. So they drove themselves to the police station to report Zoe missing, and the police began the search. The police spent all night retracing the route from Zoe's house to the church but found no sign of Zoe. Using an iPhone tracking app, police were able to locate her phone. They discovered Zoe's phone just a few hundred yards from the church, near a small creek across the street. Zoe's parents rushed to the creek. An officer approached them and informed them that a car accident had been reported a few hours earlier and that police had received a call from a witness walking a dog. That witness claimed that a man had approached him and said that a woman had been injured in a car accident near the creek. The witness rushed to the scene and found a woman lying in a pool of blood, so he called 911. As the police investigated, they quickly identified the victim as Zoe Hastings. However, it soon became clear that she had not died as a result of the accident. The evidence suggested that she had been murdered. Zoe's body was found a short distance from the minivan, which was partially submerged in the creek. There was a significant amount of blood near her body, and police observed multiple cuts on her neck. Her dress was pulled up, and her underwear was rolled down, leading detectives to suspect that the killer had likely assaulted and abused her. The police prevented Zoe's parents from approaching her body, shielding them from the gruesome scene. As they investigated further, they discovered several clues. Notably, all the minivan doors except the driver's side were locked, suggesting that the perpetrator may have driven the vehicle themselves or approached Zoe directly at the scene. Beneath the bridge, about 10 feet from the creek, a blood-stained knife was discovered. It's likely that this was the weapon used in Zoe's murder. By examining her phone records and GPS data, investigators established that Zoe had arrived at the creek by 5:01 p.m. after leaving home at 4:41 p.m. GPS revealed she drove there in approximately 20 minutes, indicating her death probably occurred within a few minutes of arrival. To account for this timeline, investigators reconstructed her activities that afternoon, tracing her stops from leaving her home. During the examination, investigators uncovered evidence. Zoe visited the nearby DVD rental store after departing home. To return a DVD she borrowed from that rental shop situated beside a Walgreens, near her place of residence. More than 50 people near that area had confirmed it. Among them had been Lester Clark, a tattoo shop employee who had worked next door to the DVD store. It wasn't until a few hours after work around 4:45 p.m. that Lester revealed he had seen a female customer who had been shopping at the store and had approached her. Lester admitted to having witnessed Zoe going to the DVD rental store. Lester added that he saw a man behaving suspiciously near the crime scene. Lester described the man as short and heavily built, and African American. However, Lester was too far away to notice any other distinguishing features. Later that evening, Lester saw the same man walking towards the store alone. The second witness, Gary Whitman, a homeless man, corroborated Lester's account. At around 4:45 p.m., Gary saw a woman approaching a white minivan in the parking lot. A man then approached her from behind, preventing her from entering the vehicle. The man showed her something from his pocket, and the woman subsequently got into the car, moving to the passenger seat. The man then drove away. Gary also described the suspect as short and heavily built, and African American, and found the situation highly suspicious. He went into the store and asked the clerk to call 911, but it is unclear if the clerk made the call. During the investigation, experts made several key discoveries. A forensic pathologist examined Zoe's body and found a small amount of male semen, indicating that Zoe had been sexually assaulted before being murdered. However, the amount of semen was too small to conduct a full DNA analysis. Investigators analyzed Zoe's car for any foreign fingerprints on the doors or steering wheel, but found none. This discovery, combined with witness statements, suggested that the killer may have driven Zoe away in her minivan. However, the lack of fingerprints did not mean that the killer did not drive the car, as they may have wiped down the surfaces after the crime. When examining Zoe's body, investigators found several hairs, but they were too small to extract a full DNA sample from. However, a breakthrough came when a DNA sample was found on a knife near the crime scene. The DNA was matched to 34-year-old Antonio Cochran, who had a violent criminal history, including arrests for theft, assault, and home invasion. 1 year before the murder, Antonio was accused of sexually assaulting a 17-year-old girl, the daughter of his girlfriend. According to the girl, Antonio offered her a ride, but took her to a secluded area and assaulted her. He was arrested and claimed that the sex was consensual, but the prosecution was unable to prove his guilt, and he was acquitted. Antonio became the prime suspect in the murder investigation. As a result, he was arrested. However, during the interrogation, Antonio denied any involvement in the crime. To gather more evidence, investigators collected a DNA sample from Antonio and compared it to the semen found on the victim's body. Unfortunately, both DNA samples were too small for a full analysis, so the experts used a different method. The partial DNA profiles from the hair and semen were then compared to Antonio's DNA. The results showed that it was matched, but not definitively. Meanwhile, detectives searched Antonio's smartphone and found some incriminating text messages. On the day before the murder, Antonio sent a message to a friend he lived with, stating he was moving out and would never see him again. At 1:48 a.m. the next day, Antonio sent another message to his ex-girlfriend, telling her that his stepmother had died right in front of him. But this information was later found to be false. In the hour leading up to Zoe's death, Antonio sent 2 texts to another woman, revealing that he had been drinking, driving around the city, and crying. These messages were his last before the incident. Later that evening, at 9:30 p.m., Antonio texted a friend, expressing confusion and despair about his life. The next day, he sent a message to his ex-girlfriend, stating that his life was over and that she would soon understand why. Detectives investigating Antonio's online activities found that he had visited local news websites over 30 times before his arrest, with a particular focus on the crime sections. Notably, 5 of these access were directly related to articles about Zoe's murder. This was unusual, as prior to the death of Zoe, Antonio rarely visited news sites. His browser history also showed a single visit to a page about gang activity. Further investigation of Antonio's smartphone revealed GPS data that, at 4:34 p.m., Antonio's phone connected to a cell tower covering the area where the store was located, coinciding with the time Zoe was there. Although this data was not conclusive evidence, it suggested that Antonio's phone was in the vicinity of the store just minutes before Zoe left the parking lot. This was significant, as Antonio's home was far away, and his phone had been connected to a different nearby tower throughout the day. Detectives discovered that Antonio had started working at a grocery store just 3 days before the incident. However, on the day after the murder, he skipped his shift without providing any explanation. Despite the extensive circumstantial evidence against Antonio, the strongest evidence remained his DNA on the knife handle. Nevertheless, this evidence alone might not be enough for a conviction, as merely holding a knife does not prove involvement in the murder. It is possible that Antonio used the knife in a different context, and someone else could have used it to commit the crime. Since no other evidence was found, detectives decided to proceed with the case and take it to court. The prosecution presented its report of the events. According to the prosecution, Antonio approached Zoe in the parking lot, threatening her with a knife and forcing her to get into her car. He then took the driver's seat and drove away. The prosecution argued that Antonio, who was emotionally distressed due to the death of a relative and intoxicated from consuming a significant amount of alcohol. The investigators' theory was that Antonio had intended to assault Zoe when he abducted her. He chose his victim, Zoe, by chance when he spotted her in the parking lot. Antonio saw an opportunity to commit a crime and acted on it. He then drove to a secluded creek area that was difficult to spot due to the surrounding trees and low-lying terrain. At this location, he forced Zoe out of the car and attacked her, stabbing her 6 times in the neck area. Antonio got back into the car and tried to drive it into the creek, possibly to hide any remaining evidence. However, the car only partially submerged, allowing Antonio to potentially wipe his fingerprints from the steering wheel and door handle before fleeing the scene and return to the store, where Lester had seen him according to initial testimony. The defense argued that most of the evidence was not convincing enough and did not prove Antonio's guilt. For example, hair analysis only showed that the DNA could not be ruled out as belonging to Antonio. But it did not confirm his involvement. DNA on the knife also did not necessarily prove that Antonio committed murder. The defense argued that Antonio could have touched the knife under different circumstances before working at the store. They suggested he might have used the knife while working at a movie theater, where he sometimes collected items left behind by visitors. However, there was no evidence to support this claim. Furthermore, if someone had taken the knife from the theater and used it to commit the murder, they would have had to be careful to avoid removing Antonio's DNA from the handle, which would have been a difficult task. The defense attempted to downplay the testimony of the second witness, Gary, by revealing that Gary had a warrant for his arrest due to a parole violation. They tried to exclude Gary's testimony, but the prosecution argued that Gary's willingness to cooperate with police, despite the risk of arrest, proved his sincerity. Gary insisted he wanted to do the right thing, even if it meant getting arrested. Antonio's lawyers argued that their client was elsewhere at the time of Zoe's murder, in order to helping a friend, but they failed to provide any substantial evidence to support this claim. Initially, the prosecution sought the death penalty for Antonio, but as the trial progressed, they realized this would be difficult to achieve with the available evidence. They dropped the request for the death penalty. After a lengthy deliberation, the jury found Antonio guilty of murder and sentenced him to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Zoe's parents expressed gratitude to the investigators and all those involved in the trial for delivering justice for their daughter. Her father shared that he had always warned his children about the dangers of the world and had taken every precaution to protect them. However, despite his efforts, his eldest daughter was abducted just a short distance from their home, and he was powerless to prevent it. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Crystal Perry. Crystal Perry had been born on August 23, 1963, in Rumford, Maine, the youngest of 10 children. Her parents had faced significant difficulties providing for their large family, leading Crystal and her siblings to grow up independent. Crystal and her siblings had always wanted to build their own lives as soon as possible. They eventually moved to different cities and states in search of new opportunities. Crystal had met her future husband Tom in high school. Crystal and Tom married and initially moved to California, but Crystal soon discovered that life in the city was not right for her. After a year and a half, they decided to return to Maine, settling in the small town of Bridgeton, about an hour from Crystal's hometown of Rumford. Crystal found a job at a local shoe store, while Tom worked various odd jobs. Crystal and Tom's lives took a new turn when Crystal became pregnant and they welcomed daughter Sarah. Although Tom was initially excited to become a father, Sarah's arrival complicated Tom's relationship with Crystal. Tom began spending more and more time at a local bar, spending almost all of their limited income on alcohol. One time, he even took the money Crystal had saved to buy alcohol, leaving them with almost nothing. As Tom's drinking habits worsened, the family did not have enough money for basic needs, including food. Finally, Crystal decided to file for divorce. After the divorce, Tom occasionally saw Sarah, but he was largely absent from her life. The situation got worse when Tom got a new girlfriend and she started harassing Crystal. This girlfriend would call Crystal, make threats, come to her house, and cause provocations, all because she was upset with Crystal's past relationship with Tom. Crystal's fears for Sarah's safety grew and she became hesitant to let her daughter visit Tom, worried that Tom's new girlfriend might actually harm Sarah. Crystal moved in with her mother and worked hard to save enough money to buy her own house. After years of saving, she bought a small house near a peaceful lake on the outskirts of Bridgeton. Crystal was excited to provide a stable and loving environment for her daughter, Sarah. Crystal prioritized giving Sarah the attention and love she deserved. In their free time, Crystal and Sarah enjoyed spending quality time together, often watching movies or chatting with each other. One day was like any other day. Crystal went to work, and Sarah went to school. They had their usual dinner together, and Crystal carried Sarah to bed. However, a few hours later, Sarah's peaceful night was broken by a loud scream that startled her. At first, she thought Crystal was arguing on the phone, but it quickly became clear that there was something much more serious going on with Crystal. Crystal had been screaming loudly in the kitchen, causing Sarah to fear that her mother was being attacked. The bedroom door had been slightly open, but the kitchen was out of sight. Stiff with fear, Sarah could not move or make a sound. As she listened, she heard footsteps approaching, making her think that the next attacker would come for her. Feeling scared, she quickly hid behind the bed. However, the footsteps stopped, and Sarah heard the sound of a kitchen drawer opening, followed by the clatter of someone rummaging through utensils. Crystal's screams continued, filled with pleas for mercy, until she was stabbed. With each stab, Crystal's voice grew weaker. Sarah realized she could do nothing and would likely be killed as well. After her mother's screams stopped, she left the room and went into the kitchen, where she witnessed a terrible scene. Her mother lay in a large pool of blood covering the floor. Confused, Sarah asked her neighbors for help and eventually found an Italian restaurant whose owner lived in an adjacent building. They opened the door for Sarah and called 911 to report the incident. The officers immediately went to their home. Upon arrival, officers witnessed a gruesome scene. The kitchen was covered in blood, including the floors, walls, and kitchen appliances. Crystal had died, and medical experts determined that Crystal had lost too much blood. Police found a handprint on the front door glass, possibly Sarah's. No other fingerprints were found, but there were many bloody shoe prints on the kitchen floor. Investigators took photos to determine the shoe size and model, assuming they belonged to the killer. A trail of blood led to Sarah's bedroom but suddenly stopped as if the killer had changed his mind. One particular detail caught the detective's attention. The killer had tried to wipe away some blood on the floor. With the blood stains spreading, this effort seemed futile. Further investigation revealed that some of the drops of blood on the floor were irregularly shaped, suggesting they had fallen from the knife. This led investigators to believe that drops of blood might have flown out of the knife during the attack. Investigations showed that, in addition to the initial drops of blood, other drops of blood on the floor appeared to have fallen at a 90-degree angle, suggesting they originated from a higher point. Detectives suspected these drops might belong to the perpetrator, who might have been injured during the crime. Further supporting this theory, the trail of blood drops led directly to a roll of tissue. This showed that the perpetrator used a tissue to stop the bleeding before hastily leaving the scene. Autopsy results showed that Crystal's body had suffered more than 50 stab wounds. The murder weapon, possibly a kitchen knife, was not found at the crime scene, suggesting the perpetrator might have brought it with him. An important detail revealed that the force used was so great that part of the knife broke and was stuck in Crystal's body. The investigation also found evidence of a previous sexual assault. As a result, medical experts were able to collect and analyze the perpetrator's semen along with the blood samples obtained, sending both for further laboratory testing. However, there was a problem. The local DNA laboratory was severely understaffed due to funding problems, leading to a significant backlog. As a result, detectives had to begin the investigation without forensic evidence, which would take at least 6 months to process. The investigation began by ruling out robbery as a motive because nothing was missing from the house. Furthermore, there were no signs of forced entry, so the police suspected that the victim had arbitrarily opened the door to let the perpetrator in. Since she was wearing pajamas, it was unlikely that she was expecting visitors. Detectives came up with 2 theories. Either the victim knew her killer, or someone she didn't know knocked on her door and convinced her to let them in under false pretenses. To pursue this lead, detectives turned their attention to the only witness, Sarah, who was undergoing a medical examination at the hospital. The police began questioning Sarah about the killer, and she explained that she had stayed in the bedroom until the incident was over. However, the police were a bit skeptical about her story. They asked her how she knew her mother had been attacked with a knife, and Sarah replied that it was obvious. Despite her reaction, detectives continued to pressure her, suspecting that she might have been withholding information and might have seen the perpetrator. During the first 3 days after the murder, police questioned Sarah 18 times in the hope that her story would change. However, she always maintained that everything happened as she initially described. Meanwhile, detectives pursued other leads and achieved their first breakthrough. They discovered a pair of boots at a local shoe store whose sole pattern resembled bloody footprints found at the crime scene. Additionally, they learned that Crystal had been harassed by Teresa, Crystal's ex-husband's girlfriend. Despite evidence that the killer was a man, the police decided to investigate Teresa, considering her history of threatening to kill Crystal. Maybe Teresa had found an accomplice to commit the crime. However, detectives found no evidence to support this theory. Further investigation revealed that Crystal was in a relationship with a man named Dennis at the time of her death. The two had met 2 years ago when Dennis started working at the shoe store. Dennis and Crystal began dating, and Dennis eventually proposed to her. Although Crystal accepted, they never married. Their relationship was tense, with frequent arguments and Dennis engaging in aggressive behavior, such as breaking objects and banging on walls. However, there was no evidence that he ever physically harmed Crystal. The day after Crystal's murder, detectives visited Dennis at his home. When they asked if he had left the house the night before or if he had seen Crystal, Dennis immediately asked if she was dead and then fainted. After regaining consciousness, he answered the detectives' questions. Dennis explained that he had planned to visit Crystal that evening but was delayed because he was helping a friend fix his car. When he later called Crystal, she said it was too late, leading to an argument and Dennis staying home. Police were able to verify Dennis' alibi, confirming that he had helped his friend that evening. Dennis also agreed to take a polygraph test, which showed no signs of deception, except when asked if he felt responsible for Crystal's death. He replied no, but the test detected his tremors. Additionally, detectives discovered that Dennis had the same shoe size as the killer, but no matching shoes were found in his house. Dennis agreed to provide a DNA sample but made a special request. Dennis had made a special request to the detectives. If they decided to arrest him, he had asked them to enter his workplace through the back door, instead of the main entrance. He had explained that he did not want to disrupt the work environment or make noise in front of his colleagues because his boss had always treated him kindly. However, because he had continued to claim innocence, this request had raised suspicions. The police investigation had led to another important discovery. They had contacted Crystal's best friend, who lived in another town, and she had revealed that Crystal had confided in her just weeks before the murder. Crystal had expressed her fear towards Dennis, saying their arguments had escalated and had become more and more heated. Dennis' behavior had also become more and more aggressive, causing Crystal to consider ending their relationship. However, she had hesitated to do so because she was afraid of his reaction. Detectives had also interviewed one of Crystal's co-workers, but she had not provided any useful information during their conversation. However, as soon as the police had left, Dennis had gone to the person's workplace and had begun asking about her conversation with the detectives. The police investigation had continued despite the lack of evidence against the initial suspect, as DNA test results would have taken several months to process. Meanwhile, they had pursued other leads. A strange tip had led them to a local man named Donnie, who had allegedly bragged about killing Crystal while drunk at a party. However, when questioned, Donnie had claimed to have no memory of the party and had denied any involvement in the murder. The police investigation into Crystal's murder had had difficulty finding any concrete clues. In an effort to uncover new information, Crystal's family had offered a $10,000 reward and had distributed flyers around town. However, Teresa, Crystal's ex-husband's girlfriend, had been seen repeatedly tearing up these flyers, raising suspicions. The ex-husband, Tom, had been thoroughly investigated but had eventually been ruled out as a suspect due to his severe alcoholism. His heavy daily drinking had made it unlikely he would commit a crime, and he had had no clear motive. Police had also investigated two other men Crystal had dated after her divorce but had found no evidence linking them to the crime. All three men, including Tom, had provided DNA samples to be sent to a laboratory for analysis. 9 months after the murder, the lab results had finally come in, but they hadn't matched any of the suspects, including Dennis. This had left detectives with no new leads. They had asked to take Dennis's DNA sample again for further testing, but the results had still been the same. The investigation into Crystal's murder had hit a dead end, causing detectives to reinvestigate their only witness, Sarah. They had suspected that Sarah might be hiding information or that a traumatic experience had caused her to repress memories of the killer. To question her further, police had gone to Texas, where Sarah was living with her aunt. A polygraph test had been administered to Sarah, but the results hadn't shown any deception. Despite this, investigators had continued to question her for days, asking the same questions over and over again. However, Sarah had always maintained that she had not seen the killer. The case had remained unsolved for several years. Police had continued to interview potential suspects and follow up on leads. But to no avail. The breakthrough had come in the late 1990s with the introduction of the FBI's DNA database. Investigators had uploaded the killer's DNA sample, but unfortunately, no matches had been found. The detective asked Sarah to work with a psychologist to try to recall any repressed memories of the crime. Even though Sarah agreed, the psychologist ultimately concluded that she really didn't remember anything and was telling the truth about not seeing the killer. The case remained unsolved for many years. Detectives continued to investigate but found no new leads. This changed in 2006 when a surprising development occurred. A DNA sample was entered into the FBI database and it matched blood and semen left at the crime scene where Crystal was killed. The DNA belonged to a man named Michael Hutchinson, who was never suspected in the case. Detectives discovered that in 2003, Hutchinson was arrested for assault and threatening with a weapon, resulting in a sentence of 6 months in prison and 3 years of probation. During his arrest, a DNA sample was collected, but it was not uploaded to the FBI database at the time. It was instead stored in a laboratory. 3 years after the initial DNA sample was taken, Michael was arrested for drunk driving with his children. He was released on bail but failed to appear in court, leading to jail time. Ironically, Michael was arrested on the day of the wedding and put in a prison cell. His DNA sample was retrieved and quickly uploaded to the database. The detective contacted Sarah, informing her of the development, but asked her to keep the information confidential until formal charges were filed. When asked if she knew the suspect, Sarah replied that she did not. Given that Michael was already in custody, the detective carefully built the case to prevent any possibility of him evading punishment. Further investigation revealed that at the time of the murder, Michael lived in Bridgeton, just 2 miles from Crystal's residence. When he was 19, Michael lived near the Italian restaurant where Sarah called the police. He regularly drove to his mother's house, which was just a short distance from Crystal's, meaning he often passed by her residence. The detective discovered that Michael could have easily encountered Crystal multiple times before the murder. When questioned in prison, Michael insisted he was not involved in Crystal's murder and denied knowing her, despite the presence of his semen and blood on her body at the crime scene. The detective found his denial unconvincing. During the visit to the prison, the detective observed the noticeable scar on Michael's palm. This was very significant because it was likely that Crystal's killer injured his hand during the crime. While this alone would not have been enough evidence in court, combined with DNA evidence, it contributed to Michael's eventual murder charge. According to the prosecution, Michael, an illegal drug user, saw Crystal as he passed her house on the night of the murder. He decided to assault her, leading to her death. While Michael refused to confess, the available evidence clearly showed that he was responsible for the assault and murder of Crystal. During the trial, an explanation was found for the murderer's lack of fingerprints at the crime scene. It turned out that Michael's job as a bricklayer was the reason. Over time, the constant wear and tear on his hands had erased the patterns on his palms, making it impossible for him to leave fingerprints. Michael presented testimony about his timeline to defend himself. He claimed he had met Crystal at a bar and they had returned to her place to have consensual sex. However, his story became suspicious when he described a strange man wearing a black motorcycle jacket breaking into the house, knocking him unconscious, and killing Crystal. When Michael regained consciousness, he allegedly tried to fight off the attacker but had injured his hand. The attacker then fled, and Michael also left the crime scene without a reasonable explanation. Michael's story was very unconvincing. The investigation revealed that the only shoe prints at the scene had belonged to Michael. If his story was true, the intruder would have had to take off his shoes before entering the house, which still wouldn't have explained the lack of other marks on the floor. Furthermore, no witnesses had come forward to confirm that Crystal had been at the bar with Michael. The trial ended on April 9, 2007, with Michael being unanimously found guilty. As a result, he received a life sentence without the possibility of parole and remained incarcerated. Sarah's life was deeply affected by her mother's death, but she found the strength to move forward with time. She pursued further education, became a writer, and wrote a book about her mother's murder. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Alex Murdaugh. Alex Murdaugh attempted to follow in his family's footsteps by pursuing a law degree from the University of North Carolina, where he met his future wife, Margaret Maggie Branton. They started dating in 1991 and got married 2 years later, on August 14, 1993, at the Second Presbyterian Church in South Carolina. Alex and Maggie had 2 sons, Richard Buster Murdaugh and Paul Murdaugh. Alex joined his family's law firm, PMPD, as a personal injury attorney, aiming to continue his family's legacy. However, unlike his ancestors, Alex misused the power and influence his family's firm provided, covering up financial crimes, theft, and possibly even murder. For over a decade, Alex's dishonest dealings went unnoticed until his youngest son, Paul, was involved in a fatal boating accident. This incident was the latest in a series of suspicious deaths surrounding the Murdaugh family, leading people to speculate that these accidents were not coincidental and were instead part of a larger cover-up, given the family's history and resources. Here's what happened on February 23, 2019. Paul Murdaugh, fresh out of high school, took his family's boat to Pucas Island for a party with friends. The group, including his girlfriend Morgan Dowie, Anthony Cook, and Miley Allman, wanted an unsupervised night of fun. They planned a house party and oyster roast on the island. To make the night complete, Paul used his older brother's ID to buy beer and hard liquor. They left the Murdaugh River House around 7 p.m. and continued partying until midnight. Feeling restless, Paul suggested driving the boat to downtown Beaufort, where he and his friend Connor had 2 rounds of shots at around 1 a.m. As they headed back to the boat, a surveillance camera caught a tender moment between Anthony and Mallory. Paul, who was heavily intoxicated, started acting strangely on a boat ride with friends. At 1:15 a.m., the group got back on the water, but things quickly spiraled out of control. Paul drove the boat in circles, showing signs of intoxication, and got into an argument with the others. Anthony wanted to get out on a nearby rock, but Paul refused. GPS footage later showed that the boat's speed increased at some point. Although Paul denied deliberately speeding up, he was in control of the wheel. The boat crashed into Arrow Creek Bridge at 2:20 a.m., throwing Mallory into the water. The others were severely injured. Connor broke his jaw, and Morgan's hand was badly hurt. Connor called 911, and help arrived soon after. When the deputy sheriff arrived, he saw blood in the main compartment and a large split in the hull from the impact. All the teenagers involved were extremely drunk, and everyone except Anthony required hospital treatment. Paul refused treatment despite being extremely agitated and having a blood alcohol level of 0.243, significantly higher than the legal limit. The search for Mallory's body took 8 days, and she was found to have died from a combination of blunt force trauma to the head and drowning. Despite multiple eyewitnesses stating that Paul was out of control while driving the boat, he was not arrested or charged. This led to rumors that Alex Murdaugh had used his influence to protect his son from justice. In March 2019, the Murdaugh family was served with a wrongful death lawsuit. Mallory's family alleged that Paul's mother, Maggie, was aware that her son was drunk when they went boating and that Buster had helped them obtain fake IDs to buy alcohol. Paul was finally charged with 3 felonies on April 18, 2019, but he never made it to court because he died before his trial. A series of mysterious deaths have been linked to the Murdaugh family. One incident involved Stephen Smith, a gay teenager, who was found dead on July 8, 2015. His official cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, and it was initially ruled a hit-and-run incident with no suspect arrested. However, Stephen's mother believed he was the victim of a hate crime. There were rumors that Stephen was in a relationship with Alex Murdaugh's oldest son, Buster, and that Buster might have been involved in Stephen's death. Gloria Satterfield, the Murdaugh family's longtime housekeeper, died on February 26, 2018, due to complications from a severe head injury. Alex Murdaugh claimed that his dogs had caused her to trip and fall, but there was no autopsy to confirm this account. The case was reopened on March 22, 2023, and it was revealed that Gloria's death was actually a murder, although no suspects have been named. Alex Murdaugh's family was involved in a wrongful death lawsuit after his housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield, died in 2018. The lawsuit resulted in a $4.3 million insurance policy settlement, but the money never reached Satterfield's sons. Instead, Murdaugh allegedly conspired with his friend Corey Fleming, a lawyer and godfather to one of Murdaugh's sons, to steal the payout. The money was diverted to Murdoch's bank account, and the Satterfield family was never notified. Satterfield's sons filed a new civil lawsuit against Murdoch in September 2021. On the same day, state investigators opened a criminal investigation into Satterfield's death, citing inconsistencies in the coroner's report. The Satterfield family allowed authorities to exhume Satterfield's body for further investigation. Meanwhile, Murdoch was facing numerous financial and embezzlement charges. He was allegedly involved in a money laundering and painkiller ring with his distant cousin Curtis Smith, which lasted from 2013 to 2021. On September 4, 2021, Murdoch orchestrated a scheme in which Smith shot him in an attempt to collect a $10 million life insurance policy. However, the bullet only caused superficial injuries, and Murdoch was able to call 911 himself. Days later, Murdoch confessed to the scheme and was charged with insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, and filing a false police report. He surrendered himself and was taken into custody. 2 days later, he announced his resignation from his family's law firm and entered rehab. However, it was soon revealed that Murdoch had misappropriated $792,000 from his law firm. His law license was indefinitely suspended in September 2021. Investigators continued to uncover numerous financial crimes, tax evasions, and embezzlements committed by Murdoch. After leaving rehab, Murdoch was arrested again and charged with 2 felony counts of obtaining property by false pretenses. He was denied bond and later indicted on 27 counts of financial misconduct, accused of stealing money from clients, lawyers, and the Satterfield family. Alex Murdoch faced additional charges on December 9, 2021, with 21 new counts added to the existing 27, bringing the total to 48. The charges included forgery, money laundering, computer crimes, breach of trust, and obtaining signature or property by false pretenses. It was estimated that Murdoch had stolen over $6.2 million from his victims. The state's investigation into his business dealings took months, with new charges emerging almost daily. By June 2022, the charges against him had risen to 81, and by the time he was formally disbarred on July 13, 2022, he faced 84 criminal charges and 11 lawsuits. One of the victims' mothers filed a legal claim against the estates of Margaret and Paul Murdoch, raising questions about the character of the once prominent attorney. Could he be hiding something even more sinister, such as the murder of his wife and son? What could have been his motive? The South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, SLAD, revisited the double murder case, considering new information gathered during the investigation into Murdoch's financial crimes. They discovered that Alex and Maggie Murdoch's marriage was troubled, and Maggie was living apart from her husband at their beach home on Edisto Island. Maggie's sister, Marion Proctor, told law enforcement that Maggie had not planned to see Alex on the night of the murders. Alex had asked Maggie to meet him at the family's hunting lodge, where she and her younger son were later found shot dead near the dog kennels. Alex claimed to have taken a long nap before leaving to visit his ailing mother, who suffered from dementia. He stated that he was away for 45 minutes to an hour and a half and found his wife and son dead upon his return. However, law enforcement suspected that Alex's timeline was questionable and lacked a clear motive for the murders. The investigation revealed that weeks before the murder, the state grand jury had subpoenaed Alex Murdoch's finances, which threatened to expose his financial wrongdoings. Additionally, his law firm had discovered his misappropriation of company funds, and he was confronted about it on June 7, 2021, the day of the murder. State authorities believed that the financial pressure had pushed Alex to hatch a plan to divert attention from his crimes and garner sympathy in the public eye. 13 months after the fatal shooting, Alex Murdoch was charged with the murders of his wife and son. The prosecutor alleged that Murdoch had shot and killed his wife and son at close range with a shotgun and an AR-style rifle. The murder weapons were never found. Murdoch's defense team argued that 2 shooters were involved due to the different weapons used. Expert witness testimony suggested that the shooter was likely between 5'2" and 5'4" tall, which ruled out Alex Murdaugh as a suspect due to his 6'4" height. However, under cross-examination, the expert admitted that there were other possible explanations for the bullet trajectory beyond the shooter's height. The investigation revealed that Maggie was shot with 300 blackout ammunition from an AR-style rifle, and a box of this ammo was found at the Murdaugh family estate. Prosecutors argued that Alex killed his wife and son to gain sympathy and avoid accountability for his financial crimes. Alex's lawyers countered that this didn't make sense, as it would only shift attention to himself and put him in the spotlight of a murder investigation. Alex was a person of interest from the start of the investigation, but his lawyer claimed he had an ironclad alibi for the night of the murders and no motive to kill his family. Prosecutors presented 2 videos taken on the night of the murder, which appeared to show Alex wearing different shirts. The Snapchat video taken from Paul's phone showed Alex wearing a blue shirt, while the body cam footage showed him wearing a different shirt. Investigators couldn't find the blue shirt, and prosecutors suggested Alex tried to influence a key witness's account of what he was wearing. Cell phone data and testimony from Alex's mother's caregiver confirmed that Alex was only at his mother's home for 15 to 20 minutes, contradicting his claim of staying for 45 minutes to an hour and a half. The most crucial piece of evidence was a video found on Paul's phone, recorded at 8:44 p.m., just minutes before the murders. The video featured the voices of Paul, Maggie, and Alex, placing Alex at the scene of the crime. This contradicted his previous alibi and confirmed his presence at the dog kennels where the murders occurred. Alex testified that he didn't shoot his wife or son, but admitted to lying about his alibi. Alex Murdaugh changed his story, claiming that his opioid addiction and resulting paranoia led him to lie to law enforcement. However, prosecutors argued that Murdaugh fabricated this excuse after murdering his wife and son. They believed he used his wife's phone to create an alibi by making calls and sending texts, including "Call me, babe," at 9:47 p.m. Phone data showed that Murdaugh's and his wife's phones locked simultaneously, and Alex's phone recorded a sudden increase in steps around the time of the murder. Prosecutors suggested this was evidence of him trying to hide or dispose of evidence, but his lawyers disputed this, pointing out that the step patterns on Alex's phone did not match his wife's. The decisive evidence came from a video recorded at the dog kennels. After deliberating for just 3 hours, the jury found Murdaugh guilty on all counts on March 2, 2023. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without parole. Additionally, he received a 5-year sentence for possession of a weapon during a violent crime. Murdaugh pleaded guilty to 22 financial crimes as part of a deal, but maintains his innocence in the murders. He appealed his conviction on March 9, 2023. In a surprise move, his lawyers filed a motion for a new trial, alleging that Rebecca Hill, a court clerk, had engaged in jury tampering. Hill denies the allegations, which include advising jurors to disregard Murdaugh's testimony and other defense evidence, pressuring them to reach a quick guilty verdict, and misrepresenting critical information to the trial judge. A hearing is scheduled for Murdaugh's lawyers to present evidence and witnesses to support their claim. However, a judge has not yet been assigned to preside over the hearing. With over 100 financial and drug crime charges pending, as well as multiple lawsuits, it is clear that the Alex Murdaugh case is far from over. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Kate Waring. Kate Waring was born in Charleston, South Carolina, into a loving family with 2 siblings and parents who worked hard to provide the best possible life for their children. From a young age, Kate demonstrated a deep love for animals, which led her to volunteer at various animal shelters during her teenage years. Apart from her compassion for animals, Kate was also an accomplished dancer, with a wide circle of friends and a radiant personality. To all appearances, Kate grew up in a supportive and nurturing environment, and in many ways, this was true. However, Kate's life took a dramatic turn just before she went off to college. In a private conversation with her parents, Kate revealed that she had been abused by someone close to the family when she was younger. Although she chose not to disclose the identity of the perpetrator, her revelation sent shockwaves through her family. Her parents were unaware of the trauma Kate had been silently enduring for years, leaving them reeling from the news. After sharing her dark secret, Kate's parents did everything in their power to support her, but the trauma's consequences only seemed to intensify over time. Initially, Kate struggled with addiction, first with alcohol and later with illegal substances. Her parents suggested therapy, which she reluctantly agreed to. They also encouraged her to move back home, hoping the family's presence would help her cope. Despite being an independent adult, Kate agreed to return home. At first, therapy seemed to be having a positive impact, but Kate struggled to break free from the past's heavy burden and live life to the fullest. The psychiatrist diagnosed her with depression, but everything changed when her father, always concerned and eager to help, suggested a trip to anywhere she desired. Kate was thrilled by the idea and soon set her heart on traveling beyond the Arctic Circle. Her dream was to witness polar bears in their natural habitat, and despite her traumatic experience, her love for animals remained unwavering. Kate and her parents searched for the perfect tour and soon purchased tickets for a trip to the Arctic Circle. Kate was thrilled to be embarking on this adventure, and as a result, her parents witnessed a significant transformation in her demeanor, replacing her depressive state with a cheerful and optimistic outlook. When they finally embarked on the trip, Kate was ecstatic. During the journey, Kate and her parents had a fantastic time on the boat, which took them to the Arctic Circle, where Kate befriended a Russian tourist. They remained in contact throughout the trip and continued exchanging letters afterward. Kate developed strong feelings for him, and eventually, after returning home, she decided to visit Russia. Upon arriving, they reunited, and she even contemplated staying longer in the country, but due to visa problems, Kate was forced to return home. Despite this setback, it seemed that Kate had finally overcome her depression. Back home, she planned to resolve her visa issues and even started writing a book for her children. Her life was finally taking a turn for the better. On Saturday, June 12, 2009, Kate's life took a dramatic turn. Her family was away on a business trip, leaving her alone at home. Normally, Kate would call her father to reassure him that everything was okay, but this time, she failed to do so. Her concerned father tried calling her back, but there was no response. Given Kate's past struggles with alcohol and substance abuse, he asked someone to check on her at home. When the person arrived, Kate was nowhere to be found, but her bedroom light was still on, suggesting she might return soon. However, she didn't show up. Furthermore, Kate had left behind her essential medication, which she was supposed to take regularly. Despite their growing anxiety, Kate's parents decided not to panic and waited for her return, considering her age of 28 and ability to take care of herself. Her father decided to wait until Monday before involving the police. On Monday morning, Kate Waring's father received a call from the bank. A bank employee informed him that someone had tried to cash a check worth more than $4,000, supposedly signed by Kate. However, the bank couldn't get in touch with Kate directly, and as her father was a co-signer on her account, they reached out to him instead. The situation seemed highly unusual because Kate's father was certain that his daughter only had a few $100s in her account, which is why the bank's security team contacted him. However, Kate's signature on the check appeared genuine. They also provided the name of the man who had brought in the check, Ethan Mack. The father did not recognize him, but since the bank authenticated Kate's signature, he assumed the man was an acquaintance of his daughter. Nevertheless, he decided to contact the police, as Kate remained unreachable. the detectives began investigating Kate's disappearance, and Ethan Mack was their first point of inquiry. He claimed to have known Kate for years and stated that she had written the check to settle old debts. According to Ethan, he frequently provided Kate with money for clothing, jewelry, and other purchases. Conversations with Kate's friends revealed that she had been friends with Ethan for an extended period, although they indicated that their relationship had never been romantic in nature, despite being close. Ethan claimed that he and Kate met on Friday night and dined at a restaurant together. Afterwards, he drove her home and went about his own business. He even produced correspondence with Kate, which corroborated his account of their dinner. Ethan allowed the detectives to search his house, where he lived with his mother, as well as his car. Although the search yielded nothing suspicious, the police still found the situation surrounding the check to be peculiar and were not quick to dismiss him as a suspect. Ethan eventually called the police station, demanding to be left alone. The police worked to reconstruct the timeline of the Friday night Kate was last seen. She had met with her therapist that afternoon, followed by a trip to the gym. Later, she entered a store, purchasing a bottle of wine. Security cameras captured her on the phone at that time, possibly speaking with Ethan, who later picked her up and they headed to a restaurant. Kate's parents remembered another unsettling detail. On the day she vanished, Kate had mentioned having some problems, but refused to elaborate. Her parents didn't recall this conversation until days later. Unfortunately, this information didn't aid the search, as weeks passed and Kate remained missing. Her parents felt the police weren't doing enough, given Kate's troubled past. However, in August, the case gained new life when a group of former police officers, led by lawyer Andy Savage, took it up. This group had been privately investigating unresolved cases, and Kate Waring's case had caught their attention. The team of 5 individuals, all with extensive police experience, began investigating Kate's disappearance. Former detective James Randall was the first to examine Kate's bedroom, where he found 2 suspicious elements. The first was a packet of medication that Kate regularly took, which was concerning because her parents confirmed she would never intentionally stop taking it. Therefore, the fact that the packet was left at home was alarming. The second suspicious element was Chinese currency on Kate's bed, which was peculiar because her parents had no idea where she had obtained it or why she needed it. The team then involved Bobby Mitter, an expert in gathering online information about individuals and tracking them. His skills proved invaluable, and he quickly discovered that on the night of her disappearance, around 10 p.m., Kate had called her friend James, who did not answer the phone. Instead, she left him a very troubling voicemail, claiming someone had stolen her credit cards. The investigation also revealed that her phone was last active at 1:53 a.m., when for some reason she called her own voicemail. Further investigation led team member Lewis to discover that the call was made from the area of James Island, which was a few kilometers from Kate's house. Another team member, former homicide detective Eugene Fraser, made an intriguing discovery. He spoke with several acquaintances living in James Island and found it odd that Ethan Mack, who had voluntarily let the police inspect his home, did not actually live there. Instead, he rented an apartment in a nearby building, which Eugene was fortunate to uncover because one of his acquaintances happened to be the landlord of the apartment Ethan had rented. Digging deeper, the detectives discovered that the police had barely scratched the surface in their investigation into Ethan. A cursory search of his mother's house was all they had done. The team decided to take matters into their own hands and uncovered a vital lead. Ethan had a girlfriend, Heather Camp. When they questioned Kate's parents about her, her mother recalled a peculiar encounter. Kate had met Heather on a train from Washington, D.C., about a month before her disappearance, when Kate was having issues with her Russian visa. Heather claimed her wallet had been stolen, leaving her penniless, and Kate sympathetically offered to lend her a substantial amount of money. Heather stated She had landed a pediatric surgeon position in South Carolina, set to start soon. Later, she announced her daughter had died in a New Jersey car crash, but her behavior was eerily calm, suggesting the news hadn't greatly affected her. The detectives also stumbled upon an intriguing fact. Heather was facing a fraud charge in Indiana for posing as a licensed doctor by falsifying documents. This new evidence forced them to re-examine the case from a different angle. They presented their findings to the police, but the authorities were surprisingly uncooperative and unwilling to continue the investigation. The team understood that the only way to get the police to take action was to gather irrefutable proof that linked Heather to Kate's disappearance. To achieve this, the team went to great lengths. They convinced the person who rented the apartment to Ethan Mack to install a secret camera outside his apartment door. Additionally, they placed a hidden GPS tracker in Ethan's car, enabling the team to track his movements and observe his activities. It didn't take long to yield results. After analyzing Ethan's travel patterns, the detectives found that he had visited numerous pawn shops across the city, selling small batches of various jewelry pieces. Although they couldn't confirm whether the jewelry belonged to Kate, the detectives believed they were getting close to a vital clue. After some time, Ethan and Heather faced a serious problem when their landlord threatened to evict them due to non-payment of rent. The team knew that if this happened, they would lose the opportunity to observe the couple's behavior and movements. To prevent this, they tried to persuade the landlord to change his mind. At the same time, the detectives quickly came up with a new plan. They asked the landlord to give Ethan and Heather more time to pay the rent, but only if they agreed to sign a contract promising to clear the debt. The strategy worked, and as soon as the landlord handed over the contract, the team sent it to the laboratory. The goal was to compare Ethan and Heather's handwriting on the contract with Kate's signature on the $4,000 check. This led to a significant breakthrough. The handwriting expert conclusively confirmed that the check signature was from the same person who had signed Heather's name on the contract, proving that Heather had forged Kate's signature. The team knew the police would be slow to act, so they came up with a new plan. They persuaded the landlord to cooperate and told Ethan that his apartment needed to be treated for insects. The team leader wore an exterminator suit and went to the apartment with the landlord. They waited until Ethan left the apartment, confirmed by his car moving away from the house, before entering. However, they were met with an unwelcome surprise. Ethan was still at home. It turned out Heather was driving his car, but it was too late to abort the operation. The investigator had to improvise, insisting that fumigation was necessary and asking Ethan to wait outside while the chemicals were sprayed. Ethan, none the wiser, agreed and left. Meanwhile, the investigator carefully searched the apartment for any evidence linking Ethan to Kate's disappearance. He searched Ethan's backpack and found Chinese money, the same notes found on Kate's bed. This was their first clue. Unfortunately, no other potential clues were found. The investigator and landlord pretended to finish the treatment and left. The team needed to regroup and devise another plan. Upon reviewing the footage from the camera in front of Ethan's apartment, detectives identified a frequent visitor, Terry Williams, a neighbor of the couple. They suspected Williams might have information about Ethan and Heather's involvement in Kate's disappearance, so they took a bold step. The team offered Williams a substantial sum of money in exchange for information about his friend's actions regarding Kate. They brought the money to Williams's apartment, but were met with an unexpected turn of events. At the time of the offer, Heather was at her home, where she overheard the entire conversation. Apparently, there was a prior discussion between Ethan and Williams. When the detective approached Williams, Heather panicked. She frantically called Ethan, explaining the situation. The investigation team was caught off guard and spent the following days struggling to determine their next move. In a shocking turn of events, Williams unexpectedly reached out to the detectives and asked them to come to his home to talk. When the detectives arrived at his apartment, Williams was surprisingly open and honest. He told them that although Ethan and Heather hadn't directly confided in him, he had had his suspicions about their involvement in Kate's disappearance. Williams then handed over an iPod he had received from Heather shortly after Kate went missing, which he had assumed belonged to Kate. The detectives analyzed the iPod and were able to trace its ownership to Kate using its serial number. This discovery provided the final piece of evidence needed to reopen the case. This time, the authorities couldn't ignore the evidence and finally arrested Ethan and Heather. During the initial interrogation, Heather agreed to cooperate with the authorities in exchange for a lighter sentence. She claimed Kate's body was located on Watala Island, approximately 20 miles from her residence. A police search team scoured the area all day, but failed to find Kate's body. It became apparent that Heather had deliberately misled them. Andy Savage decided to employ a new tactic. Recognizing that Heather was likely directly involved in Kate's murder, he met with her and promised to help. Andy offered her a deal. In exchange for revealing the exact location of Kate's body, he would assist in getting her off the forgery charges. Heather, believing it was her only chance, agreed. She provided a detailed description of the location, indicating that Kate's body was still on the outskirts of Watala Island. The detectives, minus the police, decided to investigate the location without alerting the authorities. However, they faced disappointment and did not find Kate's body. The next day, they returned and made a discovery. They found the remains of the young woman. Although the forensic doctors could not determine the cause of death, the perpetrator soon began to confess. In August 2009, Heather signed a confession for murder, obstruction of justice, and bank check forgery. It was discovered that she had been committing fraud for years and had targeted Kate as her next victim during a trip from Washington. Later, she met Ethan and began a relationship with him. Ethan's trial began in October 2010, during which the prosecution presented Heather's testimony to reconstruct the events surrounding Kate's disappearance. According to Heather, on the day Kate vanished, Kate discovered that Heather had deceived her and stolen her credit cards. Kate threatened to inform her father, which would likely lead to police involvement. Heather confided in Ethan, who sided with her despite his long-standing friendship with Kate. The investigation revealed that Kate was not alone with Ethan that night. Heather was also present. It appears that the pair attempted to negotiate with Kate at the restaurant to prevent her from exposing the deception. Heather may have promised to return the stolen credit cards and money, which were at Ethan's apartment when the three arrived. The court questioned Heather's account and ultimately sentenced her to 39 years in prison. Ethan received a slightly lighter sentence of 25 years, largely due to Heather also being charged with fraud. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The chilling case of Grace Mullane. Grace Emmy Rose Mullane was born on December 2, 1996, in Wickford, Essex, to her parents Gillian and David Mullane. She was the youngest of her three siblings and was known to be a lovely, outgoing, fun-loving, and family-oriented daughter who loved creativity and the arts. Given the family's close bond, Grace maintained daily contact with her siblings and parents, even while she had been away at the University of Lincoln, where she studied advertising and marketing. In 2018, 21-year-old Grace Mullane finally graduated with a bachelor's degree in advertising and marketing. Like most young people around that age, Grace decided that she would celebrate the end of her university education with a gap year before she settled down into a steady career. She decided to take a year out to travel South America before heading to New Zealand to tour there. She set out for a 10-month solo adventure in October 2018, initially visiting Peru before setting off for South America on November 19th. Grace arrived in New Zealand and checked into the base backpackers hostel in Auckland, ready for a 2-week stay, traveling around the Upper North Island. It was in New Zealand that Grace met up with her Tinder match, a 28-year-old man named Jesse Kempson, on December 1st, 2018. Jesse Kempson was born on December 28, 1991, in Lower Hutt, New Zealand, but he grew up in Wellington. His parents separated when he was young, and for a time, he was raised by his grandparents. He moved to Australia with his mother as a teenager, but by 2016, he had returned to New Zealand and was living in a boarding house in Wellington. Little did Grace know that Jesse had a more sinister side to him. Jesse was known to be a very charming lad, and he used that to his advantage to manipulate people. He couldn't hold a job or accommodation because of his compulsive lies. On one occasion, Jesse lied to his former landlord that he was a professional softball player, freshly signed up by New Zealand's national softball team, the Black Sox, and claimed that his contract money was coming so that he could pay for rent. This went on for 2 months, only for the landlord to find out from the Black Sox management that nobody knew who he was. Unfortunately, the landlord found out also that he fled to another place without his knowledge, leaving him more than $1,700 out of pocket. At times, he had also claimed to have a bachelor's degree in international law, come from a family of millionaires who were looking to buy a top Auckland restaurant, and have contacts within Immigration New Zealand, and many other lies he mentioned to people. In reality, Jesse was nothing more than a fantasist who could only impress people with exaggerated stories. His former roommates in a boarding house in Green Lane found him unsettling and untrustworthy before he eventually moved into City Life apartments. On another occasion, a woman he lived with claimed he stole money from her home and fled, leaving his City Life landlord thousands of dollars short after Jesse lied that he got paid monthly and still failed to make rent payments. Jesse remained an enigma to many, fabricating his way through life and seemingly evading consequences repeatedly. Back in the hostel where Grace was staying, she was happily conversing with Jesse. The unsuspecting 21-year-old Grace was charmed by Jesse, even sending a text to her close friend Anna back home, telling her that she clicked with the guy. As it was a Saturday and her 22nd birthday was the next day, Grace didn't want to spend it alone and decided to go out to celebrate. She decided to meet up with Jesse Kempson, as he lived 5 minutes down the road from where Grace was staying, and they needed to get to know each other better. On the day the Tinder matches were supposed to meet, Grace got ready for her big night out and felt nothing but excitement and optimism for the evening ahead. Grace left the base backpackers hostel in Auckland at 6 p.m. and went into the city center streets, dressed in a black dress and carrying a small handbag, unaware of the tragic turn of events that was about to unfold. The evening appeared to be going well, and the two visited a room with blue-colored walls before leaving together around 9:30 p.m. The next day was Grace's 22nd birthday, but she was not responding to the birthday wishes from her family and friends. This silence caused concern and panic, especially among her family members. It was unusual for Grace, as she would regularly update her family about her trip, bombarding them with details and pictures of her adventures. Grace's parents contacted the Auckland police and reported her as missing on December 5th. The detectives did not initially suspect any foul play, as they learned that Grace had not returned to the hostel on the night of December 1st and thought that perhaps she was staying with some new friends. It did not take long to trace Grace's whereabouts on the night she disappeared due to the extensive network of CCTV cameras around the city, and the mysterious man she was seen with that night was identified as Jesse Kempson. On the night Jesse was going to meet Grace, he dropped by a local bar, the Bluestone Room, right next to the City Life Hotel where he was living. Jesse was observed consuming 4 bottles of beer half an hour before their scheduled meeting with Grace, appearing solitary in a drinking establishment away from the main commercial area of Milan. Meanwhile, Grace was already at the base of the Sky Tower, the location they had agreed to meet, demonstrating her eagerness to potentially commence a holiday romance. The Sky Tower is very well known in New Zealand's biggest city and is one of the most obvious icons on the city's skyline, visible for miles around, and the focus of many events. Most importantly, it is highly public, and the sort of location where Grace would have felt safer to meet someone. As Jesse arrived, the pair recognized each other almost immediately, and he hugged her as she smiled and moved towards him. Their first stop was a burger restaurant and bar on the first floor of the adjacent Sky City complex. Their entire time together at Sky City was caught on camera, and the footage showed them chatting as they went up on an escalator to Andy's Burger and Bar, where they ordered cocktails from a barman and moved on to a table to talk. An hour and a half later, they left the bar and headed back outside and onto a restaurant less than a block away, the Mexican Cafe. After consuming 2 jugs of margarita and 1 of sangria, they left the cafe and headed to the Blue Stone Room, where he had been drinking alone earlier. At 8:40 p.m., Jesse put his hand behind Grace's head and pulled it towards his, kissing her for a second or so. Over the next hour, they kissed several times more, only stopping briefly while Kempson walked out of shot, and Grace checked her phone, as it turned out, sending her final message to her friend Anna. Then, Grace also walked out of the shot. Jesse had gone onto his phone to post a message on her Facebook profile picture, saying she was beautiful and very radiant, an act that led the detectives right to him. Soon after 9:30 p.m., the footage showed them leaving and heading to the lobby of the City Life Hotel, where they entered the lift. Jesse searched for his keycard as they made their way towards room 308. What happened in room 308 after the couple arrived is unknown, apart from the fact that Jesse murdered Grace. By 1:30 a.m., Grace was found dead inside the room. It is clear that Grace never left the building, and Jesse did not call emergency services or even ask for help when she died. After Grace's death, Jesse carried out several internet searches, which indicated not only how unconcerned he was about her death, but how he was actively planning to conceal it. Using his mobile phone, he searched for information on the most intense fires and the ranges of waiter care. He also searched for the location where he would later try to bury Grace in a shallow grave. The perpetrator then browsed a website to watch videos. Jesse also took 7 intimate photographs of Grace's dead body, including close-ups, manipulating her body to get the shots he wanted. The following morning, with Grace still lying dead in room 308, he texted another woman he had met on Tinder, trying to arrange a date for later that day. Shortly after, he was again captured on CCTV footage, moving from his room to a leisure store to purchase a suitcase, and then to a supermarket to acquire some cleaning supplies. He then rented a red Toyota hatchback vehicle, and as Grace lay deceased in his hotel room, he departed in the afternoon to meet up with the woman he had been exchanging text messages with earlier in the day at a bar named Rory, located in the fashionable Ponsonby suburb. Soon after meeting him at the Rory bar, he told her that all his friends were police officers and that his closest friend was coming to New Zealand to be a Crown prosecutor. When they discussed a murder trial she had once attended, he told her it was crazy how people can make one wrong move and go to jail for the rest of their lives. He then went on to say that he had heard about a guy who asked his girlfriend to have rough sex, but it had gone wrong and she had died in the process, which made the woman uncomfortable. Jesse continued with his lies for the rest of the conversation, and she became increasingly uneasy. When she left the bar, despite her anxiety, Jesse later texted her asking for another date, which she turned down. After he returned to his room around 5:45 p.m. on December 2nd, he hired a rug doctor machine to thoroughly clean the carpet, telling the shopkeeper he needed it to remove a red wine stain. Later, he parked his rental car outside the hotel, retrieved a trolley from the reception, went upstairs, and came back with the trolley, which was now carrying 2 large suitcases, one of which matched the one he had purchased earlier. He loaded the cases into the car and moved it to a nearby car park. The silver suitcase contained Grace's body, while the second case was used as a cover to avoid suspicion. Throughout the day, the CCTV revealed he changed his clothes repeatedly. Early the next day, at around 6:15 a.m., Jesse was spotted leaving the hotel and driving off in his car, stopping only to buy a shovel at a store out of town. By that time, Grace's parents were concerned after she did not reply to birthday wishes they sent her. 3 days later, Grace was reported missing by her parents, and a huge hunt got underway on the 7th of December 2018. Grace's father, David Mullane, arrived in New Zealand to make an emotional appeal for any information about his daughter's disappearance. Jesse had been identified by a detective as a suspect after Grace's mother had noticed that he had left a message on her Facebook page at 9:29 p.m. on the 1st of December, just 11 minutes before they left the Blue Stone Room and went to his room. Jesse was interrogated for the first time by Detective Diana Levinson. He claimed that he had met Grace, but they parted at 10 p.m. on Saturday, and that was the last time he saw her. In the meantime, the detectives had acquired the CCTV footage from the hotel, which proved he was lying. By the time of his second interview, he had no choice but to admit to killing Grace, relying instead on the excuse that she had died during sex by accident after she asked him to choke her in an attempt to make sex more pleasurable. Following the interview, he was arrested and took officers to Grace's body. Grace's body was found on the 9th of December at around 4 p.m. She had been buried off Scenic Drive in the Waiheke Care Rangers Regional Park, and a post-mortem examination was done on the 10th of December. The autopsy determined that Grace had been strangled, and the bruises on her body were consistent with being restrained. The murder trial began in Auckland on November 4, 2019. Kempson attempted to explain Grace's death as being accidental after a rough encounter had gone wrong, but the jury rejected his claim and found him guilty. Jesse Kempson was convicted of murder on the 22nd of November 2019, when he was 28 years old. During his trial, he was described as a sociopath who made some of the women he met or communicated with on Tinder highly uncomfortable. It later emerged that he took another British tourist out on a Tinder date before bringing her back to his Auckland motel room 8 months before he met Grace. Jesse sexually assaulted the tourist, then 21, while she lay on the bed crying and frozen with fear after she refused to have sex with him. She kept the attack secret until she recognized Jesse from media coverage the day he was charged with Grace's murder. Another of the women he communicated with on the internet, who was wary of meeting him, shared a series of messages in which he detailed his sexual preferences and admitted to her why he enjoyed doing what he did. It was speculated that Jesse's desire for domination was the underlying factor that led to Grace's tragic demise. In another trial, he was convicted of terrorizing his former girlfriend over months, subjecting her to violent assaults, threatening her with a butcher's knife, and forcing her into humiliating acts after telling her he had been sent by the CIA to kill her. Jesse was unwilling to accept what he had done and showed no remorse. On the 21st of February 2020, Jesse was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. Grace's story has raised awareness about the importance of safety for travelers, especially young women exploring the world. It has sparked initiatives and support networks to empower individuals and enhance safety measures. As we remember Grace, we honor her memory by advocating for safer travel experiences and raising awareness about the risks that travelers may face. Her legacy serves as a reminder that no one should experience harm while exploring the world. In the end, Grace Emmy Rose Mullane's legacy will be one of remembrance and hope. May her memory inspire us to continue working towards a world where travel is safe and where every individual, no matter where they are, is free from harm and can pursue their dreams. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Esmeralda Richiez. Today we will find ourselves in the state that occupies almost 3/4 of the island of Haiti. It is the Dominican Republic. Our story begins on the Azure Coast, one of the most popular beaches of the Dominican Republic. A black Honda Accord stopped in a parking lot by the beach. Music was playing softly in the car as 2 men and 3 girls were talking passionately about general topics. They looked like longtime friends who had met for a fun outing. All the passengers got out of the car and walked leisurely towards the sea. A grown man called out to one of the girls and took her hand. He whispered something in her ear, and she shouted to her friends that she would come back later. The beach was practically deserted in the evening, making it a place of rendezvous and solitude. They hurriedly got into the car and talked for a long time. The man stroked her long hair and touched her plump lips, which, like a powerful magnet, attracted his kisses. A few hours after the walk, the girl returned home and went to bed. The next morning, her mother noticed that her daughter had not come to breakfast. She went to her daughter's room and knocked on the door, hoping that the knock would wake her up, but she was met with silence. The woman entered the room and screamed. At the scream, the girl's father came running in. A terrible picture appeared before the parents. The whole bed was flooded with blood, and in the bathroom, on the floor in a pool of blood, lay their daughter. She was dead. From what they saw, the couple's legs gave out, but the father found the strength to call the police. Around 8 a.m., police arrived at the scene, examined the girl's room, and interviewed the parents. The body was taken to the National Institute of Forensic Medical Examination to establish the cause of death. The parents cried and wondered what could have happened to their daughter at home at night, but unfortunately, the events preceding this tragedy began to develop much earlier and escaped the parents' eyes. Today, before us, will be a modern story of impossible love between a grown man and a young girl. She was 16-year-old Esmeralda Richiez Martinez, born August 23, 2006, in the province of La Altagracia, in the family of restaurant owners Elio Rosti and Isabel Martinez Richiez. She grew up in a complete, happy family and had an older sister with whom she was very friendly. Esmeralda grew up to be a very pretty and bright girl. She loved to sing, dance, and displayed her special artistry, which she was proud to show in videos for social media. In 2023, Esmeralda was in her senior year of high school and was planning to go to university. She was always surrounded by friends because the girl's cheerfulness attracted not only her peers to her. 35-year-old John Kelly Martinez was among Esmeralda's close friends. John Kelly entered the public education system after passing a competitive teacher's exam and was undergoing induction for new teachers. He was still on probation, which lasted for 1 year. The pupils took a great liking to the new teacher as he treated them like friends and had regular outings outside of school. Despite the fact that John was married to another teacher and had 2 daughters, he devoted most of his free time to his students. For a long time, the teacher painstakingly built a trusting relationship with them, disposing them to him. They were mostly bright and beautiful students, such as Esmeralda. The evening walk on February 12, 2023, was a perfectly normal meeting of teacher and female students outside of school. Esmeralda was the last person John Kelly picked up that evening. He followed her into the house, introduced himself as a teacher, and promised to bring her back home. The group of 2 grown men and 3 young female students then headed to the beach in teacher Kelly's car. After stopping, everyone got out of the car except John Kelly and Esmeralda. John and Esmeralda were alone for a while, but afterward joined the company. They drank a few beers and took a short walk along the shoreline. Suddenly, Esmeralda felt sick. The girl started bleeding during the walk, forcing them to cut it short and bring her back home. In the morning, her parents found her dead. An autopsy revealed that it was a homicide, but the parents did not get answers to their questions. The National Institute of Forensic Medicine tentatively determined that Esmeralda Richards' death was due to a perineal laceration with severe internal bleeding and hemorrhagic shock following violent acts. As a result of the autopsy, the girl's death was classified as a violent death of undetermined cause. However, the question remained, who dared to do such a thing when Esmeralda was in familiar company on a walk supervised by a teacher? Interviews with the girlfriends and a review of the seized phones provided clarity and identified the first suspect. The testimony of one of the girls who had been out with the teacher and Esmeralda that evening was stunning. She said she saw the professor slip 5 pills into Esmeralda's drink while they were on the beach. The initial findings of the police sparked a lot of talk in the Dominican Republic, where abortion is banned. There was a lot of speculation in the community about the cause of Esmeralda's death. Some said she died of a heart attack, while others were sure she died from blood loss caused by the abortion pills John Kelly had allegedly given her. Everyone hoped that the medical examiner's report would put an end to the rumors and speculation. However, all the speculation dissipated when the results of the forensic examination were ready. Upon learning the results, which ruled out the possibility of pregnancy, Esmeralda's relatives were clearly puzzled and very skeptical. The victim's relatives stated that the family was unhappy that the report ruled out Esmeralda's pregnancy because this theory best matched what investigators had found out based on the forensic examiner's tests and findings, as well as the evidence collected during the investigation. After all, a review of Esmeralda's friends revealed many text messages that, although indirectly, indicated the teacher's long-term interest in the student. After the unsuccessful version of pregnancy, the investigation concluded that John Kelly drugged the girl without her consent and roughly abused her on the beach, which led to profuse blood loss and, a few hours later, to the death of Esmeralda. The results of repeated toxicology tests were pending. Given the progress of the investigation, the prosecutor's office requested a coercive measure against John Kelly Martinez and his alleged accomplice, Ruben Murillo Martinez, as they are the main suspects in the young woman's death. John Kelly Martinez was suspended as a teacher for 90 days without pay because of the evidence collected against him. The prosecutor's office requested a year of preventive detention against John Kelly as the prime suspect in Esmeralda's death. Preventive detention is the imprisonment of a person not as a punishment for a crime they have committed, but as a means of preventing the possible commission of criminal acts by that person for a period of time. New episodes and interviews with witnesses about the student's death, however, have created even more intrigue surrounding this horrific tragedy. After several interrogations, authorities learned that due to severe bleeding, the entire company had to stop several times along the way to help her, but no one took the bleeding Esmeralda to the hospital or called emergency services. Some of these stops were captured by surveillance cameras where, according to witnesses, the defendants bought alcoholic beverages, and Esmeralda and John went into the restroom together. Later, they also went into the pharmacy to buy medicine, water, and feminine hygiene pads. It was later established that Esmeralda had to completely change her clothes at one of the stops because her own were completely soaked in blood. After Esmeralda was taken home, her parents also noticed that she was bleeding heavily. Thinking it was a woman's menstrual cycle, the mother simply gave her daughter a painkiller to help her fall asleep. It was later discovered from one of the girl's cell phones that Esmeralda had sent her friend an audio message in the early morning hours, asking for help and saying, "Please help me, I'm bleeding." Unfortunately, the friend listened to the recording too late the next day, and Esmeralda was found lifeless on the floor of her bathroom, covered in blood. On February 14th, John Kelly Martinez was arrested by police, and his home was searched the following day. During the search, the clothes he was wearing on the night out with his female students were seized. His cousin, Ruben Murillo, who was the second man present that night, was also accused of trying to hide John's bloody pants. There were many ambiguities in the investigation into the event, and the prosecutor's office should have clarified the situation rather than making new speculations about an incident that alarmed the public. The public demanded a thorough investigation to determine the real cause of the young girl's death, as many felt that obvious facts on the surface had not been taken into account by the investigators. The investigation involved not only a search of the house where the teacher and his family lived, but also the car in which the crime against Esmeralda may have taken place, triggering the bleeding. The authorities urgently requested the car, but it was discovered that John Kelly's wife had sold it in a hurry. The investigation believed that the hasty sale of the car was an attempt to hide evidence that could prove violent acts. The purchaser of the automobile was Panaga Pilla. After it was learned that a coercive measure would be sought for alleged complicity in the case against J.C. Espinal Rejo, John Kelly's wife, and Frank Panaga, the new owner of the car, the vehicle was finally inspected. However, other than traces of Esmeralda's blood found in the car, no other evidence was discovered. The court ruling determined that there was insufficient evidence to keep J.C. Espinal Rejo in jail, and she was released. The investigation continued for several months, and the prosecutor launched his own inquiry, re-interviewing the 3 girls who accompanied Esmeralda. Their testimony helped investigators reconstruct the events of that night, minute by minute. At 7:30 p.m., John Kelly Martinez, 35, and his cousin, Ruben Marilla Martinez, went to the home of Esmeralda Reaches in La Otra Banda Ige, with 3 other girls in the passenger compartment of the car. John excused Esmeralda from her mother, introducing himself as her teacher and telling her of the exciting evening that awaited her daughter and the other students. Esmeralda went along with him. It turned out that originally, the whole group was going to go to the fair with amusement rides, but on the way, John changed his mind and altered the destination. Most likely, John Kelly did not intend to go to the fair, but preferred a quiet Mau beach. On the way to the beach, John stopped the car at a store where he bought a beer. Returning to the car, he asked his brother to sit in the back seat while Esmeralda sat in the front. The man had a thermos with him, into which he poured the beer and added 5 unknown pills to the drink. He offered it to Esmeralda without informing her of the contents of the thermos, but one of the girlfriends noticed. Arriving at the beach, the 3 girls got out of the car, leaving Esmeralda and John Kelly alone. They were alone in the car for about 30 minutes, and their prolonged absence was noticed by Esmeralda's friends. After a moment, without explanation, John appeared and told everyone to get in the car as they were leaving urgently. They had to make several stops along the way because Esmeralda started bleeding heavily. One of the stops was at 9:45 when they stopped at a gas station parking lot. According to eyewitnesses and CCTV footage, Esmeralda used the cafeteria restroom. Esmeralda's classmate said she asked to stop at the gas station because she needed to visit the ladies' room. And when she went in there with her friends, they noticed her clothes were soaked with blood. There was a lot of blood in the restroom, so much so that the girls had to mop the floor. The girlfriends tried to help Esmeralda. They were very frightened and asked the woman working at the gas station if it was normal, and she said it was not normal and advised them to see a doctor immediately. The girls told John Kelly about it, but the man refused to go to the hospital, saying that if he did, he would go to jail. According to the inspection document, traces of Esmeralda Riches's blood were found both in the parking lot and in the service restroom. At the gas station, they also stopped at a pharmacy at 10:21 p.m., where they bought some medication, water, and sanitary pads. Authorities obtained surveillance footage and a receipt for the purchase to verify the fact. At 11 p.m., John Kelly returned Esmeralda to her home. She arrived with heavy bleeding that began minutes after she was left alone in the car with her teacher. On February 16th, an official report came back stating that Esmeralda had been very severely and brutally abused, resulting in severe blood loss and hypovolemic shock. As scary as it sounds, this condition could have been stabilized, and medics know how to effectively help a person. But unfortunately, Esmeralda never made it into the life-saving hands of doctors that night. Toxicology testing confirmed the presence in Esmeralda's body of the active ingredient in the pills used to terminate a pregnancy, but it was previously confirmed that Esmeralda was never pregnant. This component is a synthetic gestagen with contraceptive effect when taken orally in the recommended dosing regimen. This component suppresses ovulation and fertilization, which most likely indicates that the teacher, John Kelly, was preparing for intimacy with the student he liked. After repeated medical examinations, Esmeralda's body was finally allowed to be buried. The young girl was buried in the Albano Public Cemetery. As Esmeralda's family and friends said goodbye to her, they described her as a kind and cheerful girl. Her parents bitterly recalled that fateful evening and blamed themselves for entrusting their daughter to a teacher and letting her go for an evening walk with him. On June 4, 2023, after reconstructing the last hours of Esmeralda Riches's life, prosecutors filed charges against math and physical education teacher John Kelly Martinez. On June 12, the La Altagracia prosecutor's office filed an indictment and a request to open a trial against Martinez and his cousin, Rubiel Milo Martinez, with the La Altagracia Instructional Court. The case was scheduled to be heard on August 23, 2023. However, due to the passage of Storm Franklin, the case against the teacher was rescheduled. On November 24, 2023, the judge ordered that John be retried as the sole defendant in the death of Esmeralda Riches. The trial was scheduled to begin on January 9, 2024, but was again rescheduled because only half of the witnesses called were present. The trial is scheduled for February 1st and 6th, 2024, before the Collegiate Court of the Penitentiary Chamber of First Instance of La Altagracia. The defense attorney urged the court to note that his client can only be charged with violence and accuses the parents of not taking action to avoid the death of their daughter, despite knowing about her problem. The prosecution, for its part, presented more than 40 pieces of evidence, including witness testimony and examination reports. During the hearing, the prosecution also heard testimony from pathologists and forensic experts, who showed the audience all the audio and video materials that had been collected during the painstaking and long work to determine the cause of the girl's death. In his closing statement, the defendant tried to make himself look like a victim. John Kelly Martinez admitted that he and Esmeralda were indeed close that night in the car, but he sincerely tried to assure the court and everyone present that everything was consensual. The important fact, he said, was that when he brought Esmeralda home, she was alive and well. The motion to compel specifies that Martinez voluntarily inflicted the victim with lacerations, abrasions, and contusions that resulted in her death, with severe acute external and internal bleeding and hemorrhagic shock as the terminal mechanism of death, according to the autopsy report. John Kelly Martinez's speech made no impression on the court or those in the audience. On March 14, 2024, Professor John Kelly Martinez, 36, was sentenced to 20 years in prison for violence. John Kelly Martinez will serve his prison term at the Ana Muya Correctional and Rehabilitation Center in He. Rubiel Maro Martinez, cousin of the defendant, charged with accessory after the fact, received a conditional enforcement measure consisting of periodic court appearances. Following the enforcement measure against the professor and his cousin, Riches's family attorney, Raimundo Rosario, said the family was satisfied with the restraining measure and would not file a motion to reopen the investigation. The verdict for Hon eased the pain of Esmeralda's parents a bit. They thanked everyone involved in the investigation and trial. They also indicated that they were satisfied with the verdict. Esmeralda's family did not experience the joy of the teacher's verdict because the acute pain of losing their daughter was forever lodged in their souls. Esmeralda's mother, Isabel Martinez, said she regretted letting her daughter walk with this blessed teacher and 3 friends. I talked to him on the phone and asked, "Are you a teacher?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And I told him, "Take care of my daughter. I'm gonna let her out because she's with you." "I was innocent that my daughter was with this man," the mother said. The Ministry of Education provided support to the family and relatives of the deceased girl, as well as to the relatives of the other girls who were with Esmeralda on the day of the tragedy. In their message, they expressed their hope that cases of this nature will not be repeated in the education community and in society at large. With the pain of parents who can never come to terms with their daughter's death, they said it is their turn to fight for justice. A story that began as a fun evening outing with a visit to the beach turned into a night of terror that cost the life of student Esmeralda Riches, who bled to death after lacerations, abrasions, and bruises inflicted by a man whose parents entrusted with the lives of their children. Obviously, everyone involved in the evening's outing has a share of blame. Unfortunately, because of her parents' excessive strictness, Esmeralda was afraid to ask them for help and tell them what had happened. Sometimes we think that it is easier to conceal for fear of punishment or just to remain misunderstood. But what a pity that in this battle, fear wins, taking precious life. A wealthy businesswoman, tired of solitude and possessing a significant fortune, met a charming anesthesiologist. He dreamed of finding his ideal partner. From their first encounter, there was a storm of passion between them. Not everyone, however, was pleased with the joy the eyes of this enamored pair. Deborah, the protagonist of our story, is a stylish, successful, and quite affluent woman. Her millions weren't luck. They were the result of her dedication and hard work. She spent years climbing in the interior design industry and eventually founded her own design firm, Ambrosia. Over 3 decades, Deborah poured herself into this venture with deep passion for her profession. However, her personal life didn't reflect this success. Although she married 4 times, each union ended in divorce. Despite being a devoted mother to her 4 children, her romantic relationships continually fell short. Having secured her financial future, Deborah yearned for something more essential, the simple joy of familial happiness. Her life took a significant turn due to a family tragedy several years ago when Cindy, her older sister, was killed by Billy Vickers in March 1984. During the trial, their mother testified against Cindy and supported Billy. Consequently, Vickers received a very light sentence and spent only a few years in prison for this horrible murder. Billy and Cindy had 2 kids, and this event deeply scarred them. Following this ordeal, Deborah faced extreme anxiety and developed panic attacks, fearing firearms. Living alone for an extended period didn't help. Despite friends urging her to buy a pistol for protection, she couldn't tolerate having a weapon nearby. Deborah always took great care of her appearance and surrounded herself with beautiful things. She invested considerable time and money in skincare, makeup and hair care at this point in her life. She owned a variety of stylish items, including Chanel jewelry, Cartier watches, denim clothing, and Gucci shoes. The only thing she lacked was a devoted partner. John Mayen, a central character in our narrative, was born on February 3, 1958, in California. He grew up alongside his sisters, Karen and Donna. His father, known for his deceitful and fraudulent behavior, imparted these traits to John early in life. John became involved in deceptive schemes and fraudulent activities to make a living. Additionally, he dealt in illegal substances and used them himself, which led to multiple confrontations with law enforcement and his eventual banishment from California in 1988. John completed his undergraduate studies at Arizona State University, earning a Bachelor of Arts degree. Later on, he joined the University of Dayton's law faculty. His friends nicknamed him Dirty John due to his ability to effortlessly attract women. John was notably handsome, standing around 6 feet 3 inches tall with hazel green eyes and thick dark hair. His engaging smile particularly appealed to women. After completing his academic journey, John met Tanya Sells, a nurse anesthetist by profession. They got married in November 1990 when she was 25 and he was 31. Their relationship was fundamentally based on falsehoods as John kept Tanya isolated from his family, alleging their malevolence. Tanya supported her husband while attending medical school in Tennessee and helped him obtain his license as an anesthesiologist. The couple had 2 children. However, over time, their marriage began to deteriorate. Tanya discovered from John's mother and sisters that he had been deceiving her about his past. She also found his secret stash of pills stolen from patients in need, pills he himself was addicted to, which explained his temper. Tanya promptly reported this to the police. Following an investigation, John admitted to all charges but chose to flee the state instead of turning himself in to authorities. He took refuge in a Michigan hotel where the police easily located him. John was found unconscious, surrounded by empty pill containers, prompting them to summon an ambulance. While en route to the hospital, he regained consciousness, seized a medication vial, and leapt from the ambulance but was apprehended soon after. Subsequently, he received a 6-year prison sentence in Michigan for resisting arrest and illegal drug possession. However, remarkably, John served only 17 months behind bars. He somehow managed to have his sentence reduced and was freed in 2004. During this period of his life, he met Deborah. She was 55 and he was 59. They both decided to try online dating, which is how they eventually crossed paths. Deborah was impressed by John's online profile. He described himself as a divorced doctor and a Christian searching for love. After a series of disappointing dates, Deborah was pleasantly surprised when she met John. He showed genuine interest in her life, praised her accomplishments, and seemed different from others. Their first date happened in October 2014 at a restaurant called Houston in Irvine, California. John's aim was to captivate Deborah, and he did so by sharing fabricated tales of his past, like working with Doctors Without Borders in Iraq. He mentioned having 2 children and owning multiple properties. Deborah envisioned him as a selfless doctor, devoted to global service. John treated her like royalty, which was exactly what Deborah longed for after seeking companionship for so long. He even expressed eagerness to meet her family. His charming words made Deborah's heart flutter. After leaving the restaurant, they ended up at her penthouse. However, John overstepped boundaries that night. After a few kisses, he tried to escalate things further. Deborah felt uncomfortable with the pressure and asked him to leave. The next morning, John sought to amend his mistake. He called Deborah to apologize, explaining that he had consumed too much alcohol and couldn't contain his emotions. This admission once again raised John's standing in Deborah's eyes, leading them to continue their dates. As their relationship progressed, Deborah and John spent more time together. On their 3rd date, John declared his love and proposed. Deborah was so delighted by their companionship that she overlooked several peculiarities about him. For instance, John consistently wore well-worn medical scrubs, even at stylish events organized by Deborah, and claimed he had no time to change into more appropriate attire. Deborah was unfazed and proudly introduced him as her doctor to friends, posing with him for photos. Their bond deepened, and soon they decided to move in together. Deborah's daughter Jacine, who lived with her in the penthouse, was forthright and critical of her mother's partners. She disapproved of John's unkempt appearance, finding it strange that her mother, usually dressed in Gucci, was involved with someone in dirty robes. Jacqueline also noticed John's peculiar interest in the penthouse's art, statues and paintings, as if he were evaluating their worth. After just 5 weeks of knowing each other, John convinced Deborah they should live separately. They rented a house for $6,500 a month on Balboa Island's waterfront in Newport. Deborah paid $80,000 up front for several months' rent, while John avoided putting his name on the lease due to tax complications. Deborah was so enamored with John that she covered all expenses herself without informing her children. She couldn't understand why they disapproved of him, as he pampered her like royalty, preparing morning coffee, doing grocery shopping, and striving to simplify her life. Deborah felt she had found her perfect match in John, and hoped that over time, her children would warm up to him. Envisioning a harmonious family future, Deborah arranged for John to meet her younger daughter Tara, who was known for having a softer disposition compared to Jacqueline. Tara resided in Las Vegas with her boyfriend, and upon hearing about John over the phone, decided to meet him in person. Tara's visit coincided with Deborah and John's move into their new residence. From their first encounter, Tara felt uneasy about John. His lack of cordiality, combined with his silent, solitary efforts in moving belongings, trying to project a tough exterior, didn't sit well with her. Despite reservations, Tara was willing to give John the benefit of the doubt, yet quickly began observing some concerning signs. John didn't own a vehicle, and although he claimed to have properties in Newport Beach and Palm Springs, he never suggested relocating or even invited them to visit. John appeared to spend most of his days at home, often engrossed in video games. Just before Thanksgiving, Tara decided to snoop through her mother's boyfriend's belongings and found a nurse's certificate with his name, realizing he was not a doctor. When John found out about this, he became furious and threw a massive tantrum. He accused Tara of trying to deprive her mother of happiness, shouting that she wouldn't succeed in separating them, while Deborah just stood there listening. Eventually, there was a big argument, and Tara left the house. John used the situation to convince Deborah that her children were only after her wealth. They were waiting for her demise, and thus didn't want to see her happy. On the eve of Thanksgiving, Deborah's mother Arlene, a very religious woman, arrived. John put on an entire religious act in front of her, but received another scandal instead of approval. The holiday ended in another fiasco. Subsequently, Deborah opted to seek guidance from a psychotherapist who recommended establishing limits with her offspring and pursuing a tranquil existence, a suggestion she embraced. She and John made Balboa Island their home, indulging in local eateries, strolling about, and relishing the picturesque views. At times, John exhibited youthful exuberance, capturing bare-chested selfies and sharing them with her, engaging in playful activities which rejuvenated her spirit. Deborah was immensely joyful, yet remained apprehensive about John's attire. His wardrobe was limited to aged medical scrubs, loose frayed trousers and worn-out shirts, whereas Deborah desired her partner to be fashionably attired and complement her way of life. John claimed his finer garments were pilfered during a stint in Iraq. Hence, Deborah escorted him on a shopping spree, acquiring a complete set of high-end designer outfits for him. In early December, John accompanied Deborah on a work-related trip to Las Vegas. By this time, their acquaintance was just under 2 months old, yet they chose to marry. Deborah concealed this development from her children. On one occasion, an unknown woman managed to enter John and Deborah's residence. John seized this incident to persuade Deborah of the need for enhanced security measures. Subsequently, he set up multiple surveillance cameras within their home, which he operated via his smartphone. He extended this surveillance to his wife's office, aiming to monitor her activities. John's objective was to exert total control over their environment. Gradually, Deborah began to inquire about his family background and previous life. For each query, John had an immediate justification or excuse. Despite noticeable inconsistencies, Deborah chose to ignore them, convinced she had met her ideal partner. However, her children remained skeptical. Jacqueline took the initiative to investigate John's activities. Since he didn't own a vehicle, he utilized Deborah's Tesla. Jacqueline installed tracking devices on the car to monitor his whereabouts, but this surveillance didn't reveal anything significant. Then she and Tara engaged a private investigator. The detectives soon returned with findings. They uncovered that John had declared bankruptcy, possessed a nursing license but not one for practicing medicine, and had resided in Arizona, Ohio, Indiana, Tennessee, and California. One address associated with John was the Orange County Jail. When the daughters shared these discoveries with their mother, Deborah asserted that even if these facts were accurate, her affection for him would remain unchanged. In late March, a letter intended for John was received by Deborah. The sender was a former prison inmate, but she couldn't read it, as John quickly grabbed the letter from her. Initially, he accused her of mistrust with a burst of anger, then claimed it was from a pen pal whom he was supporting emotionally. Deborah felt uneasy about this explanation. The following day, with her husband away on work, she decided to sift through his belongings. This search unveiled startling truths about the man she had wed. She discovered that John was an ex-nurse anesthetist who had succumbed to an addiction to pain medication, leading to his arrest and the collapse of his professional life. Additionally, Deborah uncovered evidence of his history as a swindler. Court records revealed that John had previously cheated and stolen from numerous women. He stumbled upon some court files online. They included a search warrant for his storage unit. Inside the unit, authorities found a .38 caliber handgun, bullets, a GPS tracker, syringes, and other suspicious items. That was the moment Deborah realized John's true identity. He was a dangerous individual and an armed felon. He had several restraining orders against him from different women. Most alarmingly, she discovered he had been released from prison on October 8th and met her just days later. Feeling overwhelmed by these revelations, Deborah examined the documents meticulously. She felt both shocked and scared. She realized the potential danger John posed to her and her children. Choosing to act normal temporarily, Deborah waited for the right moment. When John left for the hospital due to back issues, she seized the opportunity. With her family's help, she moved out during his absence. During the packing process, they found more documents belonging to John. These were prints of online comments from other women warning about him. They described John as persuasive and adept at deception. They cautioned others not to be swayed by his attractiveness and charm. Convinced of his instability, Deborah decided to end their relationship and leave. Despite her decision, John kept messaging her, pleading for her to visit him in the hospital. Overcome with guilt, Deborah relented. By June 2015, John had successfully persuaded Deborah to reconcile with him. He offered many justifications for the oddities found among his possessions. He admitted he had hidden his past because he believed a woman like her wouldn't have noticed him otherwise. For this reason, he pretended to be a doctor to impress her, and now implored her help in rehabilitating and salvaging his life. Still enamored with him, Deborah granted him another chance. They relocated together to a new apartment in Irvine. However, this decision deeply troubled her children, leading the couple to maintain some distance from them temporarily. By March 2016, the couple had been married for a year already. For 3 months, Deborah helped John recover from his addiction. However, she was deeply distressed because her entire family disliked him, especially Jacine. This animosity was mutual. Matters escalated to the point where her husband forbade Deborah from seeing her daughter. When John discovered that Deborah was paying for Jacqueline's real estate lessons, he reacted spitefully. He called the school to slander Jacqueline in front of her teachers and wrote her threatening and indecent messages, insisting that her mother no longer wanted anything to do with her. He even threatened that one day he would come and harm Jacqueline. It became evident that while John appeared to be recovering, his malevolence and cruelty were intensifying. By April 2016, Deborah's patience had reached its limit, prompting her to file for divorce. She sought a peaceful dissolution of the relationship and began gradually withdrawing money from her bank account for safekeeping. Unfortunately, she kept $30,000 in a hiding place in one of the lower drawers at home. When John discovered this money, he asserted that it belonged to him as well. Realizing that divorce proceedings were imminent, John started showing more aggression. Sensing the danger, Deborah knew it was time to flee. She took some cosmetics and work items and moved to Jacqueline's apartment in Irvine, a location she felt safe due to numerous surveillance cameras around the complex. Deborah attempted to obtain a restraining order. However, the Orange County judge denied her request since there was no immediate threat. John lived in another state and hadn't made any direct recent moves against her. With little recourse, she focused on breaking off the relationship and moving on. After the separation, John relocated to one of Deborah's properties in Nevada. He repeatedly tried contacting her, but she consistently ignored his calls. Then things took a drastic turn on June 11, 2016. That day, as Deborah drove her Jaguar to work, an alarming incident occurred. Her car was stolen from the parking lot while she was at the office. The vehicle was soon found only about a block and a half away, drenched in gasoline, but not set on fire, resulting in only minor damage. Security footage from the area clearly identified John Mayan as responsible for the theft attempt, a stark reminder of his continued threat and volatility despite living in another state. On the evening of August 20th, 2016, Tara came home from work and parked in the lot. As she got out of her car, John suddenly appeared. He attacked her with a knife, trying to drag her back into the vehicle, screamed for help during the struggle. When John covered her mouth, she bit him hard. A fierce struggle erupted right there in the parking lot. Tara, wearing heavy boots, managed to kick her assailant and knock the knife from his grasp. Seeing a chance, she grabbed the knife and repeatedly stabbed John. She delivered 13 wounds, with the last stab piercing his eye. Trembling with shock, Tara was fortunate that a neighbor saw her and came to help with a towel for her injuries. The neighbor also called the police. John was still alive when paramedics arrived. They found he had a pulse. In John's car, authorities discovered duct tape, cable ties, kitchen knives, and a passport. This indicated he might have planned to abduct Tara and leave the city with her as a hostage. John Mayan was taken to the hospital but died 4 days later at age 57. His remains were cremated and no memorial service was held, as he was universally disliked by those who knew him. Deborah and her children were deeply traumatized by the entire incident. It took some time for Deborah to return to normal life, but she still struggles with guilt for bringing a criminal into their family. Now, Deborah has become very cautious. She carries a stun gun and pepper spray at all times for protection. She has stated that she would never meet someone online again based on this experience. Today, our story repeats the biblical story of the first crime on earth. As the book of Genesis states, "And Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him." This occurred after Cain had sacrificed to the Almighty the fruits of the earth, and Abel the firstborn lambs. To the disappointment of the older man, God accepted the younger man's sacrifice and rejected his gifts. Driven by selfish jealousy, Cain called Abel to the field and there took his life. But unfortunately, even in the modern world, because of unhealthy jealousy, the older brother can kill the younger one. The end of June 2010 was very difficult for the family of Donna and Samuel Eckerd. Their 19-year-old son Sean was missing. The night before, Sean had a fight with his older brother Stanley and left the house slamming the door. Sean had never previously allowed himself to leave the house for long periods of time without his phone or informing his mother. Late that night, the whole family was alarmed by the young man's disappearance. But officially, the search for the boy began only 24 hours later. Missing person notices with photos of smiling, blonde-haired Sean were posted at all stations, in supermarkets and along the streets. But even after 2 days of searching, there were no results. The police had their hands up in the air as they continued their search. For more than 2 days, Sean Paul Eckerd was officially missing. Relatives, acquaintances, and a few friends gathered a team of activists who day and night combed local establishments, interviewed random passers-by, and minute by minute reconstructed the route of the guy that night. The police, without stopping the search, began to look more closely into the habits and rhythm of the Eckerd family, to reconstruct the sequence of events leading up to Sean's disappearance. Donna and Samuel Eckerd married with a history of family relationships. They had 6 adult children from previous marriages. After experiencing difficulties and setbacks in their early unions, they found their safe haven in each other's company and settled in San Diego, California. They rented a large, good-sized family home and attended the local church on weekends without fail. The family was devout and lived a quiet and unsociable lifestyle. A few years after the family moved in, they had a son, Stanley, and 2 years later, a second son, Sean. Donna devoted herself fully to the home and raising her sons, so the brothers grew up in love and care. They both attended a good local school, and on weekends, without fail, the whole family participated in church activities. The eldest children, having reached adulthood, flew away from their parents' nest all over the continent to start their own families. But the Eckerd family was friendly. They kept in touch with each other, regularly called each other, and spent all family holidays together. Sean was a simple and fun-loving boy. He had a bright appearance, charisma, and insight that attracted people to him like a magnet. He knew how to listen and empathize, so he made friends very easily. Stanley, on the contrary, had a more reserved character and was wary of everything new. He was shy, so socializing with people was much more difficult for him than for his brother. They had one common group of friends and classmates, despite the age difference. Together, the brothers were like one, helping each other, and always looking out for each other. The boys grew up well-mannered and studied very well. They always had a trusting and friendly relationship with each other. Small jokes about each other were accepted with humor by their parents. Respect was valued above all else in the family. Donna and Samuel raised their children from childhood with faith in God and according to God's laws. The life of the Decoded family flowed in its own way. As the brothers grew up, their interests unnoticeably became completely opposite. The youngest, Sean, played in the music band, and the eldest, Stanley, became interested in martial arts. The life of each young boy was filled with vivid impressions and emotions, which they shared with the family in the evenings. Sean was always first. His stories about music, friends, and upcoming plans took up most of the evening time. When the family gathered before dinner and shared the emotions of the day, everyone listened to Sean. There was no time for Stanley, nor, it seemed to him, was there much to share. No grandiose plans for the future, no exciting stories, not even stories of friends to draw attention to. So Stanley humbly listened to his brother's stories. On one such evening, Sean told his family that he had met a neighbor girl, Mary Jane. A fragile young girl with bright brown eyes and long blonde hair put Sean in a daze. Through the open window of the house where the girl lived, he heard a magical piano playing. As if mesmerized, he went to the captivating sounds of music and entered the house without knocking. Self-confidence in his own charm allowed Sean to get out of such a funny situation with dignity and cleverly met the girl he liked. She was a few years older than Sean, but this did not prevent them from maintaining a friendly relationship. The soul of the company, Sean often organized picnics where Mary Jane was invited. They walked a lot, visited parks and observation decks. The budding adolescent love affair was interrupted by the unfair reality of the adult world. The Decoded family received the sad news of the illness of Donna's elderly mother, Sean and Stanley's grandmother. In search of prosperity, parents tried to take into account the interests of each member of the family, but the decision made fundamentally changes the life of the whole family. Sean did not want to leave his native land, his friends, and his Mary Jane, but the parents' decision had already been made. The Decodes leave the city where their children were born and raised and moved to another state. So in 2005, as fate would have it, the Decoded family settles in the house of Donna's mother in the small town of Spring Hill in Florida, where they begin a new life. The move was like a breath of fresh air for the whole family, because the decision was the right one. Sean and Stanley's grandmother was on the mend. Sean's heart was broken. He missed his band, in which he played, his walks with Mary Jane and hangouts in his favorite city. But it is impossible for life-loving Sean to be sad for long, and after a while, a new life becomes as full as the one he missed. Donna and Samuel safely got a job at the Presbyterian church, where they were almost all their time. Donna took care of the children in the nursery, and Samuel helped with the chapel. Over the course of time, the brothers grow close again and make new acquaintances together again at school. Old life seems to be resurrected in a new place. Sean plays in the school band again. Stanley attends a martial arts school that is only a couple blocks from their new home. Despite this new busy life, Sean can't stop thinking about Mary Jane. Every night after class, he locks himself in his room and they talk on the phone for hours. The goodbyes are in the same way, with Sean saying he dreams of meeting again. Each time he promises that, after getting his parents' permission, he will definitely come to see her. Whereas the younger brother grew and kept his first love in his heart, the elder Stanley tried to establish himself in the family in his own way. Quiet and calm Stanley, by virtue of his stiffness and modesty, seemed to be deprived of parental warmth and attention. In pursuit of self-expression, he makes a series of bad decisions that will have dire consequences for the entire family. In May 2006, he informs his parents that he intends to drop out of school and devote his life to studying martial arts and creating a martial arts club. But youthful maximalism leads the guy into a bad company, where he begins to engage in petty fraud and try illegal drugs. In 2007, dysfunctional connections eventually led Stanley to arrest. He was caught stealing and charged with felony fraud-related offenses. The news of the elder son's shenanigans deals the first heavy blow to Donna. She ends up in the hospital with a heart attack, but the situation is quickly resolved with the help of a lawyer hired by Jennifer's sister. He skillfully defends Stanley, proving the lack of direct evidence, which allows the guy to quickly go free, receiving only a suspended sentence. This episode greatly frightens Stanley. He feels guilty and closes himself off in the hope of being understood and accepted by his family. Having survived the frightening events that happened to Stanley, Sean does not say anything to his parents about his decisions. During his summer vacation, he takes a job as a waiter. Having saved up some money, he leaves only a note for his mother to go to California to marry Jane. The long, 2-day bus ride to his beloved seemed like an eternity. The scenery changed outside the window. The day changed to night, and Sean imagined how at the final station he would see her, his Mary Jane. The driver announced the final stop and the bus stopped. Sean was ready to run to her, for he had already seen her happy face through the window and her long hair, which she was tucking behind her ears with her fingers. They had spent some of their happiest days together. They'd had picnics, just like they'd had in his best high school days. Sean had confessed his love to Mary for the first time, and it was mutual. After another walk, the young people sat down on a bench. Sean felt faint. His eyes went black. He fell unconscious. Sean ended up in the hospital. The young boy was fading away like a match in a matter of days. Mary Jane contacted Sean's sister. Jennifer urgently flew to California. Doctors diagnosed the cause of such a rapid fading of a strong and sturdy guy. Tick-borne encephalitis begins suddenly and very quickly causes complications of various kinds, up to inflammation of the brain. A difficult struggle for Sean's life and health began. Doctors fought for the boy's life for a long time. More than a month of coma and 6 months of rehabilitation helped him to return from the other side of the world. Sean had a very hard time recovering for a long time. An ordinary tick bite on a summer walk turned out to be a serious injury for him. Jennifer took her brother back to Florida, where he faced therapy and a long recovery. Mary Jane was left to wait. Again, the only source of communication for the lovers was the telephone. A series of troubles and unexpected illnesses brought the Eckerd family together. Donna does everything impossible to completely rid her beloved son Sean from the consequences of a serious illness. She carefully monitors his diet and exercise. Such attentive care leads to a full recovery of Sean and to Stanley's inner resentment and jealousy, which he nurtures in bits and pieces. After a while, Sean regained his strength and returned to his studies in music. In 2009, he finishes his studies and dreams of going to his Mary Jane to return together and introduce her to his parents as his favorite. But Sean's plans are not destined to come true. Stanley introduces his brother to his dream girl, Samantha Rowe. Samantha, a native of Florida, quickly found a common language with the two brothers. Stanley was in love and sympathized with her, but the girl was impressed by the cheerful and sociable Sean. For some time, Stanley actively courts Samantha, and she accepts his signs of attention. Several romantic meetings end with a passionate kiss. Stanley is immensely happy, but Samantha, who said yes to her older brother, is still thinking about her younger brother. Samantha decides to write a message to Sean in which she confesses her sympathy for him and invites him for a walk around the city. The guy agrees, and they spend the evening walking along the waterfront and talking about Stanley and Mary Jane. Sean does not seek to win the girl, after all. He has long belonged to another. A rejected Samantha writes a message to Stanley and tells him that Sean has been seeing her and confesses that he really likes her too. Stanley was furious. That same evening, he went up to his brother's room where they had a conversation. At first, the brothers talked quietly. Then their words turned into shouts. And then, there was dead silence. The parents were at home, but the brothers sometimes clarified relations quite loudly, so they did not see anything special in what had happened. Mom was the first to realize Sean was missing. He hadn't returned her calls. Recalling the evening before, she got Stanley's explanation that Sean had left home after an argument. After 2 days of searching, the police received a frightening call. The caller was Sean's sister, Jennifer. The dispatcher who took the call heard only a woman's scream in the receiver. A piercing male moan could be heard in the background. After repeated requests to calm down, the dispatcher finally records the request for help. Jennifer continues to scream. She pleads for help and reports, "Oh, damn it, my brother Stanley killed Sean. He's in the house talking to his mother. His father is freaking lying over his dead son who's been buried in the ground since early Saturday morning. Damn it. I'm begging for help." Police officers arriving at the scene of the tragedy observed a horrifying scene. In the backyard of the house, Samuel was kneeling on his knees, 2 hands dripping earth. He was pulling his son's body out of the damp earth, screaming and trying to wipe the earth off Sean. In an instant, a quiet neighborhood filled with sculpted lawns, where the 2 young brothers often waved to neighbors, turned into the scene of a violent tragedy. And now the Eckerd family, who once raised 2 sons, are left with the horrifying memory of digging in the ground only to find one of their sons and watching the other son being handcuffed and taken away. Stanley Eckerd was detained on suspicion of premeditated murder. At his first interrogation, he revealed that he had no intention of killing his brother. In a moment of anger, he struck Sean on the head. The resulting injury caused Sean to fall. Stanley checked his pulse. Realizing that his younger brother was dead, he tied up the body and carried it out the window to bury it on the lawn behind the house. Stanley's words at the inquest, "I buried him. After all, that's what you do with dead people." These words sound like the cold-blooded calculation of a serial killer, not a loving brother. In his defense, Stanley Eckerd said he did it for his mother. He wanted to protect her from the shock she might have received at the news. Afterward, Stanley planned to move his brother's body to rebury it once his parents were gone. Stanley's behavior during the interrogation varied. He cried and confessed what he had done and was obviously sorry, presenting it as an accident, or he blamed Sean with hatred in his eyes. Stanley spoke very harshly and unpleasantly about his younger brother. He called him guilty for all his troubles, and admitted that he had won the rivalry for his mother's and Samantha's love. That same day, Stanley was charged with second-degree murder and taken into custody, without bail. 2 days later, Dr. Barbara Wolfe performed an autopsy on Sean's body. She presented to the court the results of the forensic examination, which indicated that the victim's neck showed bruising under the skin and rope marks were present, indicating that the neck had been compressed to make breathing difficult. The examination concluded that the death was the result of an inflicted head injury and asphyxiation. Assistant State Attorney Pete Magrino proceeded to scrutinize the case. On February 25, 2011, the first hearing began, presided over by District Judge Stephen Rushing. On the second row were Stanley's parents, Donna and Samuel Eckerd. They wept as they watched their oldest son being led into the courtroom under escort. On April 9, 2013, the trial began in Hernado Court, presided over by District Judge Anthony Tatti. The defense was led by attorney Alan Hunter, while prosecutor Pete remained on the prosecution side. The main goal of the prosecution was to convince the jury that Stanley had carefully planned the crime. Defense attorney Allen stated that there was a spontaneous fight that led to the tragic outcome. In closing, Allen appealed to the jury to take note of Stanley's attempt to cover up the crime in the name of good intentions. Stanley Eckerd was charged with first-degree premeditated murder and faced a mandatory life sentence if convicted of that charge. Sentencing was scheduled for May 13th. Stanley's fate was in the hands of District Judge Anthony Tatti, who presided over the 5-day trial. Second-degree murder is punishable by up to life in prison. Stanley Elias Eckerd always said he never intended to kill his brother 3 years ago before burying him in the front yard of the house. Before trial, Eckert rejected an offer from prosecutors to plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for limiting his prison sentence to 20 years. Eckert remained stone-faced as the clerk read the verdict. The brothers' parents, Samuel and Donna, wept quietly. As the jury left the courtroom, Samuel Eckert's sobs turned to screams, and numerous relatives gathered around Donna and Samuel. The jury agreed that Eckert did not plan to kill 19-year-old Sean, but the jury did not completely absolve him of guilt. After deliberating for about 2.5 hours, 9 women and 3 men found Eckert guilty of second-degree murder. All the while, the Eckerts said they believed Stanley's account of what happened in the early morning hours of June 19, 2010, and criticized the state attorney's office for filing the charges. Later Friday, Samuel Eckert said Chief Assistant Public Defender Alan Lanter did an excellent job. The family questioned the appropriateness of the sentence. They filed an appeal to appeal the verdict, but were denied. "I really can't understand how the jury reached a verdict of second-degree murder in about 2 hours," Samuel Eckert said. "Despite that, our faith was not shaken," he said. One fact was not disputed during the trial. After his brother's death, Stanley pulled his body out of Sean's bedroom window and buried it in a shallow grave in the backyard of the family's Spring Hill home. Samuel Eckert found Sean's body 2 days later. Assistant State's Attorney Pete Magrino began his closing arguments at trial by showing jurors photos of Sean's dirt-covered body lying in a fetal position in the hole. "This is not a detective novel case," Magrino said. He noted that Stanley, when questioned by detectives on the day his brother's body was found, changed his testimony as many as 6 times, saying he initially knew nothing about Sean's death. For 2 days after his brother's funeral, according to Magrino, Stanley sent messages from Sean's cell phone to family members saying that Sean had allegedly gone to California to stay with his girlfriend Mary Jane. Also on behalf of Sean, he corresponded with Samantha, saying that he did not want to communicate and she should pay attention to Stanley. After hours of questioning, Stanley said that Sean had died during a struggle in the bedroom that morning. He claimed he heard a snap in his brother's neck as they fell to the floor. He then hid Sean's body to protect his mother, Donna, who has a weak heart. He said he planned to tell his father after his mother left on a trip. "Those injuries that the defendant inflicted with his hands constitute murder," Magrino said, and he also called attention to testimony and Stanley's statements to detectives about rising tensions over Samantha Rowe. He also called attention to testimony about a conversation Stanley had with his brother and a friend about revenge in the weeks before Sean's death. In that conversation, the friend testified, Stanley said that if he was going to kill someone, he would hit the person in the back of the head and bury the body in the yard. That evidence was tenuous at best and could not dispel reasonable doubt, Alan Lanter told the jury. "A crime involves an act with an intended result," Lanter said. "Yes, he was involved in his brother's death, but he didn't kill his brother." Lanter pointed to testimony from a forensic pathologist who said the blow to the head, combined with other factors, Sean's high blood alcohol content and possible lingering brain swelling due to encephalitis, likely led to his death. The pathologist also testified that hitting his head on the bedroom nightstand when the 2 men fell could have been enough to kill Sean. Lanter reminded the jury of the testimony of Donna Eckert, who said that Sean suffered from severe mood swings after suffering from encephalitis. At one point in her testimony, Donna Eckert called Sean's death an accident. The jury also could have found Stanley Eckert guilty of third-degree murder or manslaughter. Calling the case a pardonable homicide, Lanter asked jurors not to let gruesome photos of Sean's body and Stanley's poor decision to bury him in the yard distract them from what led to his death. "Stanley Eckert did something horrible after Sean died," said Lanter, "but he's not a murderer." During the final sentencing, excitement gripped the Eckert parents. Judge Anthony imposed a sentence of 50 years in prison without parole. The parents were broken. One miserable day had taken 2 sons from them at once. The cold-blooded murder of an innocent man and even a brother is clearly beyond the bounds of adequate human response. In the biblical story, the brother killer Cain was banished from paradise as punishment. But he solved the problem differently, eliminating the source of his remorse. On September 4th, 1981, 12-year-old Tim Slayton and 15-year-old Jeff Slayton had their childhood abruptly ended when they found their mother, Linda Slayton, dead in her bedroom at their apartment in Lakeland, Florida. She was found lying partially naked, beaten, and with a metal hanger around her neck. Who could have committed such a heinous crime? Could it have been someone close to the family? Or was this a random attack? Today we're looking into the case of Linda Slayton, a case so twisted you'll be shocked when you find out who killed her. So without further ado, let's get started. This is Lakeland, Florida, one of the most populous cities in Polk County. Back in 1981, Lakeland was a place with many thriving businesses and residential areas. These residential areas were filled with duplexes, and most belonged to close-knit families that had a lot of young children and toddlers. The area was also filled with lush green grass at every turn, which made the place seem homely. At 303 North Brunel Parkway, the place where Linda and her two boys lived, there were many duplexes. The family even owned one, however, they hadn't stayed there for very long. Sources said that Linda and her two sons moved from Hartselle, Alabama to Lakeland, Florida, 2 weeks before the incident took place. What could have led to her death? Could it be that she brought an old vengeance to a new place? Linda Patterson Slayton was born on March 8, 1950. By the time she was 16, she was pregnant with her first son, Jeffrey Slayton. 3 years later, she gave birth to a second son, Timothy Slayton. Soon after, she managed to convince the father of her two sons, Frank Slayton, to get married so that they could start a proper family. However, a happy family was far from what she got. Frank turned out to be an abusive husband who would routinely abuse her and the two kids. Plagued by his alcoholism and addiction, he would turn violent whenever he got drunk. Jeff and Tim recalled that their father would often turn into the monster. He was a violent alcoholic and would beat the three of them without any conscience. The thought of filing for divorce soon ran through Linda's mind, and in 1974, Linda Slayton finally became free. She divorced Jeff and Tim's abusive father, Frank Slayton, after 9 volatile years of their marriage. Linda started her new life as a single mom with 2 teenage sons. She tried her best to provide for her family and be there for her sons as a caring mother. Juggling work and chores, it was obvious that she had limited financial capabilities. They didn't have a car, so her sons, Jeff and Tim, would often go to school either by walking or by sharing rides if they were offered one. Apart from school, Jeff and Tim loved playing football, but since they didn't have a ride to football practice, their coach, Coach Joe, would often pick them up and drop them off at or nearby their home. A week before the 4th of September, Linda was preparing her home to welcome her mother. She wanted her mother to move in since she thought her presence in the house would help get it in order and make it more homely. Her sister, Judy, would also often come by to visit her. During her visits, the sisters would spend their time together over a hot cup of coffee. However, on the 4th of September 1981, around 8:30 a.m., Judy arrived at Linda's apartment to find something she never expected to see. On the 3rd of September 1981, the night before the murder, Jeff Slayton came home from football practice, but when he found nothing to eat at home, he headed over to his grandparents' place. Later, at about 9:30 p.m., Jeff reached back home only to find the house empty. Around 11:30 p.m., Linda and Tim, her younger son, came home. She mentioned going to a neighbor's place to play a game of cards. But before that, she settled in to complete her chores, and Jeff saw his mum doing the dishes. Tim, on the other hand, went to sleep. Around this time, her son, Jeff, came up to her and apologized, since the two had fought earlier that day. As they made up, Linda said goodnight to her boys. Jeff remembers saying these words, "I love you, Mom. I'll see you tomorrow." Little did he know, those would be the last words he would say to her. September 4th, 1981. Around 8:30 a.m., Judy arrived at Linda's apartment. She went up to Linda's room and knocked on the door twice. There was no answer. She thought Linda might still be in bed, but it was unusual as Linda usually woke up before the boys left for school. As she made her way out of the house, she noticed something strange. The window in Linda's room had a missing sheet, and on top of that, the window was wide open. Judy returned to Linda's room, knocked again, and this time opened the door to find Linda Slayton's lifeless body. She screamed. This caught the attention of a caretaker near the house, and he immediately called 911. Linda was found dead with a wire clothes hanger around her neck. Her body was partially naked, and she lay right across the bed with her head down on the floor. There were no signs of struggle. Her cupboard was wide open. Apart from that, all the other things in her room were in their usual places. Within a matter of minutes, the Lakeland police, news reporters, and medical services all arrived. The yellow sign reading "Crime Scene, Do Not Enter" was plastered all over Linda's home. Tim and Jeff were both awakened by police officers and were asked to leave their home, which was now a crime scene. While Jeff was able to get past his mother's room without seeing her lifeless body, Tim saw his mother one last time. But this time, she wasn't alive. The two were then sent to live with their grandparents, pending further investigation. Linda was 31 years old when she was murdered. As soon as her sons, Tim and Jeff, were sent away to their grandparents, Sergeant Edgar Pickett from the Lakeland Police Department arrived at the crime scene. He was the one who not only led the case, but also found crucial evidence of the crime scene. At the beginning of the investigation, Sergeant Edgar found a few prints in Linda's bedroom. Most of the prints belonged to the deceased Linda Slayton. However, there was one print that didn't belong to her. It was a palm print. The palm print was found on Linda's bedroom windowsill. It was the same windowsill that had a missing window sheet. To find out what really happened to Linda Slayton, she was taken for an autopsy. There, they found several marks and bruises around her arms, shoulders, and neck. Also, when her body was found, she was partially naked, which may have been evidence of sexual assault. After running the autopsy, it was determined that she had been brutally beaten at first, then sexually assaulted, and then strangled to death with a metal clothes hanger from her own cupboard. Of the evidence found, the palm print was the most crucial, as it could identify the culprit on the spot with a match. But forensic DNA analysis didn't exist back then. In order to determine who might have been responsible, the police were forced to overlay her entire family tree. The first suspect was Frank Slayton, Linda's ex-husband. Back in 1975, at the time she divorced Frank, Linda stated that he had an aggressive nature. He was abusive and did not take care of his family. It was no doubt that he would be deemed a person of interest in this case. He was taken in for questioning. However, when the officials looked into his whereabouts the night Linda was killed, they found that he was at home in Alabama. Even then, they remained suspicious of him. The second suspect was Linda's own son, Jeff Slayton. But why did the officials think of him as a suspect? Well, before Linda was killed, Jeff Slayton had a heated argument with his mother. Jeff had a very close yet distant relationship with his mother. He, being the eldest son, felt the pressure of living in a family with an abusive father and later with a single mom. There were certain times when Jeff and his mother would often get on each other's bad side, but he always made sure to make up for it. On the night of the murder, Jeff made up with his mother before going to bed. The police questioned him about the incident. They even told him to take 2 polygraph tests. What he passed, the police cleared him from the list of suspects. The third suspect was Linda's boyfriend. At the time, Linda, a single mom, had started dating someone. The white male, who remains unnamed, had a close relationship with her and her kids. However, when police ran a background check and polygraph tests, he was cleared. By this time, they were running out of suspects, until, by September 2001, they got a tip. Almost a year after Linda was murdered, there was a rumor about a 24-year-old man who committed a similar crime. His name was Jimmy Ulmer. At the time, he was linked to a crime where he pulled a 10-year-old girl through her bedroom window and nearly killed her. When the police ran a check on him, they found that he was convicted of 80 years to prison time. Also, the fact of his crimes and Linda's case were strikingly similar. To top it off, at the time of the murder, Jimmy was found staying in the same apartment complex as Linda did. The evidence found against him made the police think he was the prime suspect. But there was a downside. Jimmy had died while the investigation was going on, so it wasn't possible for a DNA match. That would mean they'd have to dig up his body to perform the test. Luckily, Jimmy's mother allowed a DNA test and got his sample. However, once the results came back, there was no match. If it wasn't for the family or the next-door convict, who could have killed Linda? By this time, the days had turned into weeks and then months. In Lakeland, detectives looked at other people as well, but no one was ever charged. And without any new leads, the case turned cold. The Slayton brothers had to face a new reality in life. Their mother was gone, and they had only their grandparents, Clarence and Margaret Harris. While the investigation was going on, Linda's parents and sons held a funeral for her, and soon after they started to get back to living their lives and regular routines. The brothers went back to school. As time passed, they started to move on from what happened back up 303 North Burnell Parkway. Tim got back into playing football. He even recalls to this day that his teammates and coach were very supportive. When he didn't have a ride back home to his grandparents, Coach Joe would still take him to and from practice. A month later, Tim hung a photograph of his team on his bedroom wall. To him, that picture gave him the motivation to pull past it all and move forward. In the years that followed, the young brothers who just lost their mother grew into men who cared and loved for their own families. Jeff got married and went on to have 2 children. Tim also got married and started a family. As time went by, both brothers would frequently check in with the Lakeland investigators to see what kind of progress was being made on their mom's case. Jeff Slayton still recalls the night that Linda was murdered. "I didn't hear anything, and it's so hard to live like that." Even Linda's neighbors stated that they didn't hear anything unusual the night she was murdered. Despite the fact that Jeff and Tim had each created successful lives for themselves, they made sure that the case was moving forward. Tim reveals this in an interview, saying, "No matter how many detectives we had to go through over here, we were going to let them know we're still here, and we want to know who killed our mom." 17 years had passed since Linda's passing. But despite the passage of more than a decade, the police persisted in their investigation. By 1998, Sergeant Edgar Pickett had left his position, and the Slayton case was assigned to the new investigation team. Detective Brad Grace was assigned to this case. While going through the pieces of evidence, he found unidentified DNA from the Slayton case that had been collected back in 1981. He sent this to the state's major crime lab at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, also known as the FDLE. By 1999, the crime lab at the FDLE was able to break down and develop a full DNA profile of Linda Slayton's unknown killer. After receiving the DNA profile, he then ran through the list of suspects once again. This time, he was determined to get DNA samples from each one. The year was 2001, and Detective Grice thought that the DNA profile match would definitely reveal the murderer. He made certain to speak with the Slayton brothers first. Soon, he managed to arrange a meeting with them. When the brothers arrived, Detective Grice collected their DNA samples and sent them for further testing. When the results came back, there was no match. Soon after, Jeff's name was completely cleared from the case. Frank Slayton was the next subject of investigation. At this point, Frank had given up drinking. Over the years after Linda's passing, he appeared to have lost some of his aggressive and abusive tendencies. Tim and Jeff were also able to meet their father during this time and mend some of the wounds from the past. Frank agreed to send his DNA for testing. The DNA, however, did not match the hypothetical unidentified DNA profile that the detective believed would point to the murderer. Detective Grice submitted the unidentified DNA profile from the Slayton case to the FBI's National DNA Database in 2005, where it was continually cross-referenced with newly submitted DNA samples. He eliminated dozens of suspects through the course of his investigation using DNA evidence. However, he retired in 2015 after spending 17 years on the Slayton case. After Detective Grice, the Slayton case was assigned to new detectives Tommy Hefcock and Russell Hurley. Detective Tammy learned 3 years into the investigation that the FDLE had developed a groundbreaking technology that could help in identifying any unidentifiable DNA. Taking advantage of the chance, the detective sent Cece Moore, a genetic genealogist who worked for the FDLE, the unidentified DNA from the Slayton case. The public genealogy website GEDNACH, which is run by Cece Moore, produced a list of people who shared DNA with the unidentified killer after she uploaded the anonymous DNA from the Slayton case there. She then used birth certificates, marriage certificates, obituaries, and social media to create a genetic family tree. As the investigation went deeper, Moore created 3 family tree branches for the murderer, which helped her identify the one person who was most likely to be responsible for the killing of Linda Slayton. The family tree built off the DNA profile showed that he was almost certainly the person who murdered Linda Slayton. It was here that the twist got so bizarre that it even shocked Tim and Jeff Slayton. This was the picture that hung on Tim's bedroom wall. And the person just above his shoulder was Joseph Clinton Mills, often called Coach Joe. The family tree built off the DNA profile showed that he was almost certainly the person who murdered Linda Slayton. After learning the killer's name, Detective Tammy and Russell got on with Joseph Mills' background check. They then uncovered some crimes committed by him. One of them was committing grand theft by forging a will. Even though he was never charged for it, the police did get his palm and fingerprints. And, as you may recall, Sergeant Edgar Pickett had discovered a palm print on the windowsill at the crime scene. This meant that the family of the deceased might finally receive closure in the cold case, which had been open for more than 40 years at this time. Investigators compared the palm prints taken in 1981 from Linda Slayton's windowsill to Mills's palm print, and they discovered a match. But detectives still needed to compare a recent DNA sample from the suspect to the DNA from the Slayton case, despite their conclusions. So they made the decision to obtain his DNA for testing without his knowledge. They did this by taking garbage bags from Joseph Mills's house and searching them at the police station for items that could have his DNA. While sorting out the trash, they found a piece of medical adhesive tape in one of the bags that they sent to the crime lab for testing. The detectives looked into Mills's private life in more detail while they awaited the DNA results. He'd spent the majority of his 58 years in Kathleen, Florida, which was only 30 minutes from the crime scene. He had children and grandchildren, and was married as well. The results from the crime lab, which were obtained almost 2 weeks later, showed that the unknown DNA that was found and Nils's DNA on the medical adhesive tape were an exact match. In December 2019, detectives arrested Mills and brought him in for questioning. Back in 1981, Joseph Mills was just around 20 years old when he committed the crime. Just 1 day after the murder, police also spoke to him, but it was over the phone. During the brief call, Mills told investigators that he dropped Tim off after football practice on September 3, 1981, the night before the murder. But police never considered him a suspect. Mills said to the cops during his questioning that Linda Slayton had allegedly invited him over for consensual sex, but the detectives were aware that this was a fabrication. They concluded that he targeted her even before the night of the murder, as he was often seen picking up Tim for football practice and dropping him off at home after practice. Also, the fact that he stayed near the Slaytons was a matter of suspicion. So, what actually happened on the night of September 3, 1981? According to Mills's statement, Mills had just dropped Tim off at his house after football practice. Later that evening, when no one was home, he returned and broke in through Linda's bedroom window. He then waited for her to go to bed while hiding in her closet. That's when he beat, sexually assaulted, and finally strangled Linda with a wire hanger from her closet. Joseph Mills pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and sexual battery. At his sentencing, members of Linda Slayton's family confronted him and demanded to know why he killed her. What a sort of love? Why did people really follow her? All Mills told the court was, "I am a good person," and they didn't receive a response or an apology from him. Mills was given a life sentence in prison without the chance of parole by the judge. Even though the Slayton brothers take some solace from the knowledge that Mills will never escape from prison alive, They're enraged by the fact that he enjoyed all those years of freedom, while they spent the majority of their lives without their mother. For Tim, it was something totally unexpected, since Coach Joe was a role model for him back in the day. Tim also stated that Mills would often ask him about the case. He'd ask if there was any progress in finding the culprit. But to keep himself off the radar, he extended his help in making it easy for the boys during football practice. He'd asked us how the case was going. He wouldn't ask questions about it. What is any new news or any new leads? And I was like, no, nothing, you know. To this day, Tim doesn't actually believe that his mother's killer was actually the person he trusted the most. Tim even says, I've been carrying the killer's picture in my house at this table the whole time and never had a clue. Jeff, who was completely bereaved, still thinks about what life might have been if Linda were still alive. Tim and Jeff remain extremely close after this incident. They frequently visit their mother's grave, and Jeff always lights a candle on the anniversary of her passing. Despite all that's happened to them, they've never stopped trying to live life to the fullest for their mother.